Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another scary story. Your place where we uncover the darkest mysteries in a calming and reflective way. For the next hour, I want you to put on your earphones, put your phone face down, and close your eyes. Relax, and let this story take you to a world full of chills and mystery. I know you use this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, leave a comment sharing where in the world you're listening from. Now get comfortable and relax. I always hated sleepovers. Not for the reasons you'd think. I wasn't scared of the dark or ghost stories or even the stupid dares everyone dared each other into. I hated them because they always ended with someone doing something they shouldn't. And that night at Mia Dawson's, that was the last sleepover I ever went to. Mia lived on the very edge of Hollow's End, in this two-story farmhouse that looked like it had stopped aging somewhere around 1952. The porch sagged. The wind whistled through cracks in the walls. But what made it worse, what made it different, was the woods behind it. Everyone in town knew about Black Pine Forest. The older folks called it cursed, but never in the dramatic horror movie way. It was quieter than that. The way they'd lower their voices when they mentioned it, the way they'd glance toward the trees even if they were miles away. My mom used to say, "Don't go near that place. Not after what happened to the Graves, girl." I didn't know much about Lillian Graves other than the basics. 9 years old, wandered into Black Pine one summer in '78. They never found her. Not a body, not a scrap of clothing, just her name, repeated in hushed tones like saying it too loud might call her back. So yeah, I had zero intention of going anywhere near those woods, but then Mia invited us over for her birthday sleepover. Just me, Noah, Jake, and her. And Jake's older brother Ethan, the unofficial pain in the ass of our group, was there too, supervising, according to Mia's mom. Which meant sitting in the basement playing Metal Gear and ignoring us unless he had something snarky to say. It started out normal. Pizza, old horror flicks, some crappy cake from the store. We were 13, so everything was funny. Until the movies got scarier, and the night got quieter, and someone, Noah, I think, brought up the woods. "I heard Lillian's ghost walks around out there," he said, grinning like a jackass. "And if you hear her giggle, you're next." Mia rolled, her eyes. "That's such crap. My parents have lived here for years. We've never seen anything." Jake leaned forward. "Yeah? Then why don't we go see for ourselves?" Ethan laughed from the doorway. "You little freaks won't last 5 minutes out there." That was all it took. I didn't want to go, but I wasn't about to be the one who backed down either. So, we grabbed our flashlights, 2 half-dead ones and someone's phone light, and headed out the back door just after midnight. The air was cold. The kind of cold that sinks into your shirt and doesn't let go. Black Pine didn't look that bad from a distance, just rows of thin trees tangled with brush. But the closer we got, the less it looked like part of our world. At the tree line, we all paused. No one said it, but we felt it, like we were stepping into something we weren't supposed to. I turned back and looked at the farmhouse. Warm light spilling from the windows, laughter echoing from the TV inside. It felt safe. Then I stepped into the woods and everything changed. The air got heavier, thicker, like trying to breathe through a wet blanket. We didn't talk, we didn't joke, we just walked. Maybe 30 feet in, Jake stopped. "Do you hear that?" We all froze. Listening. That's when it hit me. There was nothing. No wind, no bugs, no rustling leaves, just our own breaths and something else. Something that matched our footsteps. One for one. We stopped. So did it. I looked at the others. Their eyes were wide, scared. And then, from somewhere deep in the trees, a soft, high-pitched giggle. That giggle didn't belong in those woods. It wasn't just the sound of it, it was the placement. It came from somewhere too close and too high, like someone was standing in the branches above us. But when we snapped our flashlights toward the trees, there was nothing. Just bark and dark. Noah whispered, "Did you hear that?" We all nodded, too shaken to speak. Jake was gripping his flashlight so tight his knuckles had gone white. It's probably just some animal, Mia said. But her voice cracked halfway through, and none of us believed her, not even her. We stood there a few seconds longer, half frozen. I don't know who started walking again. Maybe Jake, but one by one we followed. No one wanted to be the last in line. I kept checking behind me, half expecting to see someone, something, walking just a few steps back. But every time I looked, it was just shadows and trees. The deeper we went, the more the forest changed. The air felt wrong. Still, but charged. Like the moment before a thunderstorm, when you know something's coming and there's nothing you can do to stop it. And there was this smell, faint but sharp, like wet dirt and old flowers. Then we found the stump. It sat in a small clearing just off the trail, bathed in a beam of moonlight that slipped through the canopy. And on it, sitting like it had been waiting for us, was the doll. Porcelain. Pale. One eye slightly darker than the other, like it had been replaced. Its face was cracked down the cheek, and the little dress it wore, white with a faded pink ribbon, looked damp, like it had been out there for years. But it wasn't covered in leaves or dirt. It was clean, placed. Okay, Noah said, backing up. Nope, 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 nope. Jake moved closer. It's just a doll, he said, but there wasn't an ounce of confidence in his voice. Mia knelt down beside it. Why would someone leave this out here? I wanted to tell her not to touch it. Something in me screamed not to touch it. But before I could say a word, she reached out and froze. From the trees just beyond the clearing, a voice called out, "You found me." High-pitched, light, almost playful, but flat. Wrong. Mia jumped back, falling onto her hands. The doll wobbled on the stump, but didn't fall. Jake spun around with his flashlight, slicing through the dark. Who said that? No one answered. Then, we heard the footsteps. Not loud, but steady. Crunch, 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 coming toward us from 3 different directions. That was it. Run, I yelled. We didn't argue. We bolted. The clearing vanished behind us. The doll, the voice, the weird stillness, all gone in an instant. But the footsteps didn't stop. They followed, matching our pace, always just a few feet behind. Too many feet. Branches whipped our arms and legs. Thorns caught my jacket. I lost one of my shoes, but didn't stop. The only goal in my head was simple: get out. We crashed through the tree line like we were breaking the surface of water after nearly drowning. The sounds returned all at once. Crickets, wind, a distant dog barking. I collapsed on the grass behind Mia's house, gasping. Jake slammed the back door shut behind us, locking it with shaking hands. Inside, the house was warm, safe, or so we thought. Ethan was standing at the base of the stairs, pale and stiff. "What the hell happened to you guys?" he asked. No one spoke. We were all looking at the same thing. The muddy footprints on the wooden floor. Small, bare, child-sized. They started at the door and ended in a perfect line. Right in front of where we were standing. No one moved. We just stood there staring at the wet, muddy footprints, 5 of them, small. Like a little kid had walked barefoot straight through the back door and stopped, right at our feet. The weirdest part? The prints weren't smeared like you'd expect if someone had tracked in mud. They were perfect, crisp, each toe visible, the kind you'd see in a movie when something wanted to be noticed. Ethan's voice cut through the silence. "Is this some kind of prank?" Jake shook his head slowly. "No one's laughing, dude." Ethan looked down again, then up at us, then back at the prints. "All right, seriously, what the hell did you guys do out there?" Mia was pale, like lips losing color pale. "There was a doll, on a stump. It talked. I swear it talked." "You heard it too?" I asked. My voice sounded distant, like it was coming from somewhere outside me. Mia nodded. Ethan scoffed. "You're telling me a doll talked to you? Jesus, you guys watched 2 horror movies and now you think you're in one." But the doubt was already slipping from his face. He saw the way we were shaking, the way none of us were making eye contact. This wasn't a joke. "I'm calling Mom," he said finally, already pulling out his phone. "No," Mia said quickly. "Don't. She'll just say we imagined it." Ethan hesitated. "Then what do you want me to do? Just ignore this?" "I want it to go away," she whispered. We all did. Jake went to the kitchen and grabbed some paper towels. He bent down to wipe the footprints away but stopped halfway through the motion. "They're dry," he said. "What?" He touched the floor again. "They look wet, but they're dry. Like stained, almost." I leaned over to check. He was right. They looked muddy, fresh. But when I touched them, the wood was smooth, clean. It didn't make any sense. "Okay," Ethan muttered. "This is getting weird." Understatement of the year. We ended up crashing in the living room. None of us wanted to sleep alone. Mia brought down blankets and pillows, and we set up camp in a messy pile on the floor. The TV stayed on. We turned on one of those dumb comfort shows with the laugh track, but none of us laughed. No one said it, but we were all waiting, listening. Around 2:30 a.m., just as the others were finally starting to doze off, I heard it again, a giggle, soft, distant. But inside I sat straight up, heart hammering. The sound had come from upstairs. I glanced around. Jake was snoring quietly. Mia was curled up in a blanket burrito. Ethan was on the couch, arms crossed, eyes closed. I got up. I didn't want to, but I had to know. Had to see if it was just my brain playing tricks. I crept out of the living room and onto the stairs, each step creaking like it was announcing my presence to the entire house. At the top, everything was dark. Just a faint nightlight from the bathroom glowing at the end of the hall. Then I saw it at the far end, right by Mia's bedroom door, stood a shape, small, barefoot. A girl in a white nightgown. She didn't move. She just watched me. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. My legs refused to work, and then, blink, and she was gone. No footsteps. No sound. Just the hallway, empty again. I turned and ran back downstairs, heart jackhammering against my ribs. The time I got back, Mia was awake. "You saw her, didn't you?" she asked. I didn't answer. Didn't need to. None of us really slept after that night. The next morning was too normal. That's what messed with us most. The sun came up like it always did, pouring warm light into Mia's kitchen while we ate cereal with silent spoons. Birds chirped outside. A breeze rustled the trees. It all felt fake, like the world was pretending yesterday hadn't happened. Ethan tried to talk about it, tried to convince us we'd hallucinated, or maybe got too in our heads after those movies. "Sleep deprivation can mess with you," he said, standing by the sink. "Stress, adrenaline, suggestion. You thought you saw a girl. It doesn't mean she was there." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But I hadn't imagined her. The way she looked at me, wide eyes, head slightly tilted like she was curious. Like she already knew something I didn't. Jake broke the silence. "What if it was Lillian Graves?" We all froze. Mia looked up from her bowl. "My grandma used to talk about her. Said she went missing when she was 6, walked into Blackpine, and never came back." "That's just an old town legend," Ethan muttered, rubbing his eyes. "People say she haunts the woods, lures kids in with dolls. It's a story." "Yeah," Jake said. "But so was the giggle. So was the doll. So were the footprints. And all of that actually happened." Mia nodded slowly. "There's something in those woods, and I don't think it's done with us." The rest of the weekend passed in a strange haze. Mia kept jumping at sounds, pipes clanking, the dog next door barking. Jake barely said a word. Noah wouldn't even talk about the forest. He left early Sunday morning without saying goodbye. Monday at school was worse. Everything felt off. The hallways were full of people, but I felt completely disconnected. I'd catch flashes in windows, movement where there shouldn't be any. Once, during chem, I looked into the darkened glass of a storage cabinet and thought I saw a face peeking back at me. I started keeping the lights on in my room, music playing at night. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw her. The little girl in the nightgown. Watching. Always watching. 3 days later, Jake called. "Me, I think it followed me home," he said. "What?" "I keep hearing it, the giggle in my room, in the garage. My mom thinks I'm messing with her." "You're not." "No, I'm not." He paused. "I think we brought it back, from the woods." I didn't know what to say. That night, I stayed up, scrolling deep into Hollows End history forums, Old Town Facebook groups, anywhere that mentioned Black Pine or the Graves family. Buried in a local history site scanned from ancient paper records, I found it. An old article from 1973. Local girl vanishes. Authorities search Black Pine Forest, Lillian Graves, age 6. Disappeared playing in her backyard. Only trace they found was her doll, porcelain white dress, pink ribbon, discovered days later in the exact same clearing we'd found it. The article ended with something that made my skin go cold. Neighbors claim to have heard laughter at night near the tree line. Others speak of footprints on porches. Police believe the girl likely drowned in the stream or got lost in the hills. Still, locals warn children not to enter the woods. They say she's still waiting to be found. Still waiting. The next night, Mia called me in tears. "It was outside my window," she whispered. "What was?" "Her. I saw her face and the doll. It was on the porch swing." I didn't sleep after that. None of us did. It's been 2 weeks since the woods, 2 weeks since we found the doll, since we heard her voice, since she followed us back. I still check every mirror twice, first to see myself, then again to make sure it's just me. Sometimes I catch a flicker, a pale shape in the corner, gone before I can blink. Jake stopped coming to school. His mom told the office he's sick, but no one's seen him in days. Mia says he barely talks when she calls, just says, "She's close." Over and over, Noah won't answer my texts at all, and then there's Mia. She's not okay, not even close. I went over last night after her 4th missed call. She didn't say anything when I got there, just led me upstairs to her room. The doll was back, sitting in the middle of her bed like it had always belonged there. But this time the ribbon was missing from its hair. "I locked it in the shed," she whispered. "Swore I wouldn't go back." But this morning it was in the hallway. Sitting up, looking right at me. I picked it up, cold, heavier than it looked. The porcelain face was cracked slightly, like it had been dropped. One of the eyes, those painted glassy things, had a chip in it. It looked wrong, like it wasn't looking through me, but into me. "We need to end this," she said. "How?" She didn't answer, but I knew. We had to go back. That night, just after midnight, we met in her driveway. Me, Mia, and, surprisingly, Jake. He looked awful, hollow cheeks, dark circles under his eyes. But he came. The forest looked exactly like it had before. Still. Too still. It didn't feel like walking into nature. It felt like stepping into a sealed room, like the air didn't belong to us. The trees were silent, frozen, watching. We found the clearing easily, like it wanted us to return. Mia held the doll in both hands. She didn't speak, just knelt down and placed it gently on the stump. "I brought you back," she said, voice steady but quiet. "You can stop now." Jake shifted beside me, restless. "Is that gonna work?" "I don't know," she replied. For a moment, nothing happened, and then, behind us, leaves crunched. We all turned at once. There she was, standing maybe 15 feet away. Same white nightgown, same pale feet. Her hair hung in messy tangles, and her eyes, God, those eyes were too big, too still, like a photograph that hadn't quite finished developing. She stepped forward, just once, then stopped. I didn't breathe. I don't think any of us did. She looked down at the doll, slowly, tilted her head, a long silence. Then she turned and walked back into the trees. No words, no screams, no chase, just gone. We stood there for what felt like hours. Then Jake finally whispered, "Is it over?" We didn't answer. We didn't know. It's been 3 days since we went back. The doll's still in the woods. We haven't touched it, haven't talked about it. Mia says the house feels lighter. No more footprints, no giggles, but she still keeps the lights on at night. Jake started coming back to school. Quiet, careful, but present. As for me, I can't walk by a mirror without flinching. Sometimes late at night I think I hear the swing on Mia's porch creak. Sometimes I dream about the woods, about that clearing. And in those dreams, I see her standing there, just past the tree line, watching, still waiting, because maybe she didn't want revenge. Maybe she just wanted someone to find her. But some part of her, whatever's left, never really left that forest, and maybe neither did we. I never thought I would be babysitting in a neighborhood like Ravenswood. It was one of those eerie places that felt like it was stuck in time, wrapped in fog that didn't lift even in the middle of the day. The houses were old, some of them, crumbling beneath the weight of history. And then there was the Wickett family home, tall, Victorian, with sharp angles that seemed to pierce the sky. It sat at the end of a dead-end street, like it was waiting for something to happen. It looked like a house out of a Gothic novel, too grand, too silent for such a quiet neighborhood. I wasn't sure how I ended up with the babysitting job for the Wickett family. They were wealthy, reclusive, and their son Lucas was different. I heard stories, but I didn't think much of them at the time. I needed the money, and the job was simple. Just look after a 7-year-old for a few hours while his parents went out to a charity event or something else that people with too much money do on weekends. The first time I met Mrs. Wickett, she gave me a smile that was too tight, as though her face was used to looking calm, but the tension underneath couldn't be hidden. "I hope you're comfortable here," she said in a voice that was as cold and polished as the house. "Lucas can be peculiar. He says odd things sometimes. Don't encourage him. Just keep an eye on him, and you'll be fine." She didn't tell me much else. Her words hung in the air for a moment, and I remember feeling like I should ask more questions, but I was too caught up in the way she held herself, like she had something to hide. She glanced over at Lucas, who stood silently by the stairs, looking up at me with wide, unblinking eyes. Mrs. Wickett was gone before I could ask her about the boy's odd behavior or the house's unsettling presence. She gave me one last, tight smile, turned on her heel, and walked out of the front door. I turned to Lucas, who hadn't moved. "So, what should we do?" I asked, trying to sound friendly, though I felt anything but. His reply was flat, his voice too old for a 7-year-old. "We could play," he said, his eyes still fixed on the empty space beyond me. I couldn't help but notice how pale his face was. He had dark hair that hung a little too long over his forehead, and his skin was so pale that I wondered if he'd ever seen the sun. "Okay, what do you want to play?" I asked, trying to keep the conversation normal. He didn't answer at first. Instead, he walked over to the living room and sat cross-legged on the floor, facing a large empty armchair near the fireplace. I followed him, trying to put my unease aside. It was just a kid, right? "You're sitting in Great-Grandpa's spot," he said, his voice flat, emotionless. I paused, suddenly aware of how awkward everything felt. "Oh, sorry," I said, shifting in my seat. "Is he visiting?" Lucas tilted his head in that strange, unsettling way. "He's always here," he said, his voice carrying an eerie calm. "He says you're pretty. He also says your heart beats too fast." I froze, my blood running cold. He didn't know anything about me, let alone something as private as my arrhythmia. I'd never told anyone. It was a condition I'd had for as long as I could remember, my heart sometimes skipping beats or racing out of control, an unpredictable and inconvenient thing that kept me from ever being completely at ease. "Your heart beats too fast?" I echoed, trying to sound calm, though my mind raced. Lucas just stared at me, his eyes unblinking as if waiting for me to say something else. I wanted to laugh it off, to say it was just a strange coincidence, but something about the way he looked at me, the way he didn't blink, made the words stick in my throat. The room grew too quiet. The silence in the house felt thick, like the walls were pressing in on me, like the entire house was holding its breath. I shook myself out of my stupor. "Do you want to play a game, Lucas?" I asked, eager to change the subject. He nodded, still staring at the spot in front of him, unblinking. I forced myself to smile. But the house and the boy were already starting to make me feel uneasy, and I wasn't sure if it was just nerves or something deeper, a creeping sensation that I couldn't shake. Whatever was going on in this house, I didn't know if I wanted to be around long enough to find out. Lucas had already turned away from me, his attention focused on something that I couldn't see, sitting in that strange, stiff silence. The air seemed to thicken, and the weight of the house pressing down on my shoulders made it hard to breathe. I tried to shake it off. "All right, let's play. What do you want to play?" I asked again. He tilted his head. "Hide and seek." I blinked. "Okay, I'll count. You hide, right?" He didn't answer. He just stared at the empty armchair, his lips curling into something resembling a smile. But it wasn't friendly. I forced a laugh, trying to shake off the growing sense of unease. "All right, then I'll count," I said. 1, 2, 3. But as the numbers left my lips, I felt something shift in the air. The house wasn't still anymore. The stillness was gone, replaced by something else, something far too real. I finished counting, but when I opened my eyes, the house was too still, far too still. The air felt like it was holding its breath, suspended, as if the walls were waiting for something to happen. I tried to brush it off, chalking it up to the anxiety of being in a strange house with a strange boy. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I stood still for a moment, listening for any movement. There was none. I took a few tentative steps forward, my footsteps echoing against the wood floors in the silence. The soft tick of the grandfather clock in the corner was the only sound. The rest of the house seemed to be holding its breath, waiting as though the world itself had paused. "Lucas?" I called out, trying to sound casual, but the uncertainty in my voice betrayed me. "You can come out now." "Nothing." I walked further into the room, toward the staircase. Still. No sign of him. The house seemed to stretch out endlessly, its corridors dark and long. Each door I passed felt like it was watching me, like the walls themselves were looking, waiting for something. My pulse quickened, and I felt my skin crawl with an awareness I couldn't place. "Lucas?" I called again, a little more urgently, this time. "Where are you?" I began to make my way toward the hallway, stepping lightly, trying not to make a sound. When I reached the foot of the stairs, I heard a small sound, a faint shuffle like someone dragging their feet. I followed the sound toward the attic stairs, which were hidden behind a small door at the far end of the hall. I hadn't even realized. There was an attic in this house. There hadn't been anything that indicated such a space. But there it was, a narrow set of stairs leading up to what I could only assume was a dark and dusty storage space. A cold chill crept down my spine, but I took another step, my hand resting on the door handle, hesitating only for a moment. I opened it slowly. The stairs creaked as I ascended, the soft sound of footsteps echoing behind me. And then, as if the house itself was holding its breath, I found Lucas. He was sitting cross-legged in the middle of the attic floor, his back to me, his head tilted slightly to one side. His eyes were fixed on something just beyond my line of sight, something hidden in the shadows. The darkness in the attic was thick, making it hard to see much of anything. I shivered, but it wasn't from the cold. It was from the unsettling stillness of the room. The air here felt even heavier than it did downstairs. "Lucas?" I called, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't respond. His stillness was unsettling. The only sound was the faint hum of the house, the creaks, the groans of old wood, the distant tick of the clock downstairs. I took another step toward him, then stopped. He was whispering something under his breath, his lips barely moving. Leaned forward, my curiosity piqued. "Lucas?" I asked, now standing just a few feet away from him. "Who are you talking to?" His head snapped around, his pale eyes meeting mine. He didn't blink, not even once. His gaze was unnerving, too intense, too calm. "Great-grandpa says you'll leave soon," he said in that flat tone of his. I frowned, my skin prickling with unease. "Great-grandpa?" Lucas tilted his head, to the side, his gaze shifting back toward the corner of the attic. "Great-grandpa says you'll leave soon," he repeated as though it was the most natural thing in the world. "He says your heart will stop just like his did." I stood frozen, my heart thumping in my chest, the words echoing in my mind. "What?" I stammered, my mouth dry. "What do you mean? Who's your great-grandpa?" Lucas didn't answer. He didn't need to. He simply shifted his gaze to the shadows in the corner, and I could feel something stirring in the air around us. A presence, something watching us, something that wasn't there but somehow was. The shadows felt too thick, too alive. The unease that had settled in my stomach now morphed into full-blown fear. Something was wrong with this house. Something was wrong with Lucas. And in that moment, I realized the creeping suspicion I'd been trying to ignore. He wasn't just a strange kid, he was a conduit, a vessel for something older, something darker. I stepped back slowly, my breath coming faster now. "Lucas, I think it's time to go downstairs. Your parents will be home soon." Lucas didn't respond. He just continued to stare at the empty corner, his gaze unwavering. I forced myself to turn away, my heart hammering in my chest. I hurried down the stairs, my footsteps loud in the oppressive silence of the house. I didn't look back. I couldn't. It was as if the attic itself was reaching out to me, pulling me back. I was shaken, but I had no choice but to continue with the evening. I couldn't let the fear take over. But as I walked down the hallway, I couldn't shake the feeling that Lucas hadn't been alone in the attic. There had been something there, with him. Something that wasn't a figment of his imagination, and that something was still watching. Waiting. When I reached the living room, I saw that Lucas had quietly followed me down, though he hadn't said a word. He stood by the window, his eyes fixed on the street outside. The atmosphere in the house had shifted again, growing heavier, colder. I glanced at my watch. It was nearly time for his parents to return. But my heart was still racing, my mind lost in the strange and terrifying encounter with Lucas in the attic. I didn't want to admit it, but I was scared. Scared of the house, scared of what Lucas had said, and terrified of what I might uncover if I stayed there much longer. As I waited for the Wickett family to return, the house settled into an eerie stillness, and I tried to push down the growing dread in my chest, but deep down I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't leaving without answers. The minutes stretched into an unbearable eternity. I tried to busy myself by organizing the toys scattered across the living room floor, anything to distract myself from the unnerving silence that seemed to wrap itself around me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. But no matter what I did, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Lucas had gone back to sitting by the window, staring out at the street with those same unblinking eyes. His expression was unreadable, his face as pale as ever, as if the house was draining the life out of him. I couldn't decide whether it was just the isolation or if the boy himself was truly different. But the more I watched him, the more I felt like I was waiting for him to do something. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly, marking the seconds as they dragged by. I checked my phone. It was nearly 8:30 p.m., and the Wickets hadn't returned yet. I glanced at Lucas, wondering if I should try to engage him again, try to break through the odd quietness that seemed to envelop him. "Lucas," I said softly, standing up. He didn't turn toward me. "Do you want to play another game? Maybe something different?" He didn't respond, just kept his gaze fixed on the street, his small fingers pressed against the window pane. I took a deep breath and approached him, my shoes muffled against the carpet. "Lucas, you want to try something fun?" I tried again, crouching next to him. Finally, his head turned slightly, just enough to glance at me without blinking. "Hide and seek," he said, his voice flat, without a hint of enthusiasm. He wasn't asking. He was telling me. I blinked, a knot tightening in my stomach. "We just played that," I said carefully, trying to hide the unease creeping into my voice. He tilted his head slightly to the side again, his gaze distant and unnerving. "We can play again. You'll count. I'll hide." "Okay," I said hesitantly, not sure how much more of this I could take. But what was the harm? It was just a game. Just a child's game, right? I turned my back to him, deciding to go along with it. "All right, Lucas. I'll count, and you hide. Ready?" I started counting aloud, but my voice felt like it was echoing in a vacuum. Every word seemed to reverberate in the dead silence of the house. 1, 2, 3. I counted slowly, letting the seconds drag just to calm my racing mind. But when I reached 10, and I turned around to begin searching, the stillness of the house was jarring. I felt my heartbeat quicken. Where was Lucas? I called out his name, but there was no response. The house had never felt so quiet, so empty. It was as though the walls themselves were swallowing sound. My eyes darted from one corner of the room to another, searching for any sign of him. I took a few hesitant steps forward, my nerves already on edge. The flickering lights above seemed to cast longer shadows, stretching like dark fingers across the walls. The shadows seemed to shift. I couldn't be sure, but it felt like they were moving with purpose, following me as I walked. "Lucas?" I called again, louder this time, my voice sharp and filled with uncertainty. A soft sound, a rustling like fabric brushing against itself, came from the attic door at the far end of the hall. I froze. My skin prickled with dread. No. He couldn't be in the attic. I walked toward the attic stairs, my heart hammering in my chest. The narrow stairs leading up to the attic looked darker than I remembered. A thick shadow clung to the corner of the door as though someone was watching me from above. "Lucas," I called again, my voice trembling now, betraying the fear that was taking over my every thought. I gripped the handle of the door, my breath shallow as I pushed it open. The staircase creaked, and I could feel my pulse thrumming in my ears. The musty smell of old wood hit me like a wall, but there was something else now. Something darker, like the air itself was thicker, more oppressive. And then I saw him. Lucas was sitting in the corner of the attic, facing the shadows. His back was to me. He was whispering again, but his voice was barely audible, as if he were speaking to someone or something just beyond the reach of light. I took a step closer, my mouth dry, my legs feeling like lead. "Lucas?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. His head turned slowly toward me, but it was like his gaze didn't really meet mine. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking through me. His eyes were wide, unblinking as usual, and that same hollow, empty expression was still on his face. "Great-grandpa says you'll leave soon," he murmured, his voice detached, like he wasn't even speaking to me anymore. "He says your heart will stop, just like his did." The words sent a jolt through me. My breath caught in my throat, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. My heart beat harder, faster. The arrhythmia that had always been a quiet presence inside me suddenly roaring to life, responding to the weight of Lucas's words. I couldn't think. My thoughts spiraled, and everything felt surreal. It wasn't just a game anymore. It wasn't just a weird kid. The dread that had been building inside me now spilled over. I could feel my body trembling, but I forced myself to speak, to do something. "Lucas, what are you talking about?" I whispered, trying to steady my voice. "What does he mean?" He didn't answer right away. He just stared at me, those eyes unblinking, his expression unchanged, and then he spoke again. "He says you're not going to make it," Lucas said flatly, his voice without emotion. "Your heart's going to stop." I stood there in the attic doorway, the world around me feeling hazy, like I wasn't fully present, like I was outside my own body. My hands were shaking, my pulse in my ears, and I could hear the voice of my own fear speaking louder than Lucas's words. But what he said? I shook my head. It didn't make sense. None of this made sense. I wanted to turn and run, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. I couldn't stop myself from stepping closer, even though every instinct in me screamed to get out. I needed to leave. This place, this house, Lucas, everything felt suffocating. Before I could speak again, I heard a loud thud. The sound of the front door slamming shut downstairs. The wickets. My mind snapped back to the present. The sound had broken through the fog in my thoughts, pulling me out of the trance I had fallen into. The parents were home. With a shaky breath I turned, stumbling backward, my heart still racing, my hands cold and clammy. I rushed down the stairs, trying to ignore the shivers running through my spine. But as I reached the bottom of the stairs, I froze. The living room was exactly as it had been when I first walked in. The only thing different was the armchair by the window. It was rocking. I stood there staring, my breath catching in my throat. It was impossible. No one had been sitting there, and yet the chair was moving, slowly rocking back and forth. And then I heard it, a soft voice, a whisper that seemed to rise from the shadows. "You shouldn't have stayed." The moment I heard the voice, my entire body went rigid. It wasn't just a whisper. It felt like it was coming from the very walls of the house, like the air itself was carrying a message I wasn't meant to hear. It was faint, distant, but unmistakable. The chair in the living room continued to rock, creaking with each gentle back-and-forth motion. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. The whisper, almost mocking in its softness, echoed in my mind. "You shouldn't have stayed." I could feel the weight of the house pressing down on me, thick and oppressive. The silence that followed the whisper was even worse than the sound itself. It was as if everything in the house had stopped moving, frozen, holding its breath, waiting for something. Or perhaps waiting for me to make the next move. I stared at the armchair, my body unmoving, my feet glued to the floor. I had no idea how much time passed. It felt like hours. All I could hear was the faint sound of the chair creaking back and forth, and the blood pounding in my ears. Then I heard the front door open, the sound slicing through the tension like a knife. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, heavy, deliberate, the soft shuffle of shoes on hardwood floors. My heart stopped. My mind screamed at me to run, but my feet wouldn't obey. I was rooted to the spot, unable to move, unable to speak. From the hallway, I heard a voice, Mrs. Wickett's, a strained and sharp whisper, as though she was trying to keep her voice steady. "Lucas, where are you?" My pulse quickened. The words hit me like a slap in the face. I had completely forgotten. They were supposed to return. The Wickets were home, yet everything in my mind was telling me to get out, to leave before it was too late. I turned my head slowly, and there was Lucas, standing at the base of the stairs. His pale face was expressionless, his eyes locked on mine. His small hands were tucked into his pockets, and he didn't move a muscle. "Lucas," I said, my voice shaking. "Where are your parents?" He didn't respond. His lips didn't even twitch. He just stared at me. Then I heard the soft creak of the floorboards, closer this time. Mrs. Wickett, stepping into the living room. I could see the flicker of her shadow cast against the walls, from the hallway. But when she appeared in the doorway, I froze. Her face was ashen, her eyes hollow with exhaustion, as if she hadn't slept in days. Her lips pulled into a tight, forced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Emily," she said with a forced cheerfulness that didn't match the tense atmosphere. "You're still here. Good. I hope everything went well with Lucas." I opened my mouth, but the words caught in my throat. I tried to form the question on the tip of my tongue, but I couldn't. Everything in my mind was screaming at me that I needed to leave, but I was still here, standing, frozen, in the heart of the house. I looked at Mrs. Wickett, and there was something in her eyes, something hidden, something sharp. It was like she was trying to communicate something to me, but not through words. Something silent, something that didn't belong. She smiled again, but it was hollow, forced. "Did Lucas behave himself?" she asked, looking down at him. I turned my gaze back to Lucas, who was standing motionless, like he was carved out of stone. His unblinking eyes never left mine, and I saw a flicker of something dark and knowing in his gaze. I couldn't find my voice. The feeling in the room had shifted, twisted into something darker, something I wasn't ready to confront. The whisper in my mind returned louder this time. You shouldn't have stayed. There was a strange, ominous silence between the three of us, and the air was thick, heavy with a tension that I could hardly breathe through. I needed to say something. I needed to ask about the chair, about the strange words Lucas had said, about the eerie presence I felt around me. But I couldn't bring myself to ask. Every time I opened my mouth, the words died before they could leave. Lucas, Mrs. Wickett said softly, her voice cutting through the silence. Why don't you go upstairs for a little while? Your father and I need to talk to Emily. Lucas didn't move for a long moment. Then slowly he turned and walked up the stairs without a word, his footsteps soft and measured. The stairs creaked as he ascended, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched even now. The air seemed to thicken around me. Mrs. Wickett looked at me, her eyes narrowing just slightly. I hope Lucas wasn't too much trouble for you tonight, she said, though there was something in her voice that didn't match the words. He's always a little difficult to manage. I finally found my voice, though it was weak, hoarse. He said something strange about his great-grandfather. He said I wouldn't be here much longer, that my heart would stop, like great-grandpa's did. Mrs. Wickett's expression flickered, just for a moment. And then she straightened, her face again smoothing into that tight smile. Lucas says things sometimes. He's got quite the imagination. His great-grandfather passed away years ago, but Lucas still talks to him. Don't mind him, but I wasn't so sure it was just an imagination. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I felt a shiver run through me. Something in her reaction, something in the way she looked at me, as though measuring me, felt off. When did he pass away? I asked, almost against my will, but the question slipped out of me before I could stop it. Mrs. Wickett blinked. Why, just tonight, she said, as though the answer was too simple to be anything but the truth. He passed at around 8 o'clock, I believe. The words hit me like a physical blow. My stomach lurched, and for a moment, everything went still. The room felt too small, the air too thick, I couldn't breathe. That's when Lucas, I started, but my voice faltered. My mind raced to connect the dots. The exact time that Lucas had been talking about his great-grandfather, about the heart-stopping. Mrs. Wickett's smile faltered for a second as she saw the recognition dawn in my eyes. She quickly turned away and walked toward the hallway, her heels clicking sharply on the hardwood floors. I'm sorry, Emily, I know it's a lot to take in, she said, her voice distant now, as though she was talking to someone far away. Please don't worry about Lucas, he's a special boy, he just says things that sometimes make us uncomfortable. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my mind whirling with everything I had just learned. I could feel the walls of the house closing in, the air growing thicker with each passing second. It wasn't just the house. It wasn't just Lucas. It was all connected. Everything was connected. I was about to ask more, about to demand answers, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I turned, slowly, to face the window, and in the reflection, I saw it, just behind me, reflected in the glass. The armchair, it creaked, and I knew then I wasn't alone, and neither was Lucas. I tried to shake the fear gnawing at my insides as I stood frozen in the middle of the living room. Mrs. Wickett had turned away, her movement so smooth, so controlled, as if nothing had happened, but my mind was racing. Everything felt too calculated, too perfectly timed. Lucas's strange words, Mrs. Wickett's evasive behavior, the way the house itself seemed to hold its breath, it all clicked together in a way that left me dizzy with the weight of it. And the chair, the rocking armchair that was still moving despite no one sitting in it. I glanced toward the window, my reflection staring back at me, a pale imitation of who I used to be. The air in the house felt thick, pressing against my chest, making it harder and harder to breathe. I didn't want to look at the armchair, but I couldn't tear my gaze away from it. The creaking sound was louder now, its rhythmic motion unsettling, as if it was inviting me to stay, to watch, to wait for something. I turned sharply and made for the front door. I had to leave. I needed to leave now. I wasn't sure if it was the house or Lucas or something worse that was holding me here, but whatever it was, I knew I couldn't stay another second. The air was thick, as though the house itself was pushing against me, refusing to let go. I reached for the door handle, but my hand shook. I paused, staring at the doorknob. A cold sweat formed on my forehead as I noticed something in the reflection of the glass beside me. For a split second, I thought I saw someone behind me, someone standing in the hallway watching me. My heart slammed against my ribs. I turned quickly, but there was no one there. I had to get out. I had to leave before something else happened, before I found out more than I could handle. I opened the door and stepped outside into the night, the cool air rushing to meet me. The street was empty, the neighborhood silent, bathed in the dim light of the street lamps. It was almost like the world outside was a different place entirely, a world untouched by the eerie force inside the house. I didn't stop. I kept walking, my mind racing, but then I heard it. A soft sound like a whisper coming from behind me. I turned, expecting to see someone. Maybe Mrs. Wickett, maybe Lucas, or even someone else. But there was no one. The air seemed to vibrate with an almost electric tension. My breath quickened, my feet moving faster. But just as I reached the end of the street, my phone buzzed in my pocket, making me jump. I pulled it out, almost dropping it, and saw a missed call from an unknown number. A chill ran down my spine. There was something about this moment, this feeling, that made me hesitant. But I forced myself to tap the screen, the cold feeling of dread creeping through me. I hit call back, and the phone rang for what felt like an eternity. Finally, someone picked up. A man's voice, shaky, broken, as if he were struggling to find his words. "Emily Hart? Is this Emily Hart?" the voice asked, his tone panicked, breathless. I frowned, my throat dry. "Yes. Who is this?" The man cleared his throat, and for a moment, there was silence, an odd kind of tension on the line. Then he spoke again, the words coming out in a hurried rush like he was trying to explain something that didn't make sense. "Mr. Wickett here. I'm so sorry to call you like this, but I found your card, the one with your number. It was in the master bedroom, the one with your name written in red." My stomach dropped. My breath caught in my throat. Red? My heart was hammering in my chest now. "What do you mean, my name written in red?" I whispered, though I didn't. Want to hear the answer? "I don't know how it got there," Mr. Wickett said, his voice breaking. "But it was in the chair, the armchair in the living room, the one where," he hesitated, "where my father always sat." I felt a rush of cold wash over me, and I had to grip the phone tighter to keep it steady. "When did you find it? How is that possible?" I choked out, barely able to get the words out. "Around 8 o'clock, Mr. Wickett answered, his voice barely audible now. "That's when we found it. The exact time, exactly when Lucas was with him." The words hung in the air, and I felt my body turn to ice. The exact time Lucas had been talking to his great-grandfather. The exact time he had whispered about my heart stopping. My heart pounded so violently in my chest now that it was hard to breathe. The arrhythmia, the racing beats, everything felt connected, but how? What was Lucas doing? How was he involved in this? And then, as if to answer my unspoken question, I heard a faint sound from behind me, a creak like a door opening, no, like someone moving in the shadows. I whipped around, my heart nearly stopping, but there was nothing there. The wind had picked up, making the trees sway and the shadows dance in the corners of my vision. The street ahead was still empty, just the quiet hum of the distant cars passing by. But my pulse raced and a creeping realization settled in my stomach. I wasn't going to get out. Not that easily. You need to leave. Mr. Wickett's voice came again, urgent now, panic seeping through his words. Please, for your own safety. I turned back toward the house, a sudden, terrible awareness filling me. The air had shifted again, the weight of it, the feeling that something was watching me. Emily, do not come back, he said, his voice shaking. I swallowed, feeling the weight of his words settle in my chest. But as I stood there, the realization hit me harder than the cold wind. I couldn't leave. Not now. I couldn't explain why, but something in the house was calling to me. I didn't know if it was the house itself, Lucas, or something older, something darker. But as much as I wanted to run, as much as my mind screamed for me to get out and never look back, my feet were already moving, drawn back to the house. I turned and began walking back toward the Victorian home at the end of the cul-de-sac, my mind swirling with unanswered questions, with confusion, with fear. But deep down I knew the answer. I wasn't going to leave. Not until I had seen it through to the end, whatever that might be. When we first found the cabin, it felt like the perfect escape. I wasn't looking for anything grand, just a quiet weekend getaway with Sophia, a break from the noise, the traffic, the endless to-do lists. I thought a remote cabin on the edge of Blackwater, Oregon, would be a dream. Somewhere we could just breathe, reconnect, and forget about the grind of daily life. The listing said it was secluded and charming, the kind of place where you could relax by the lake, listen to the wind rustling the trees, and enjoy nature in its purest form. And for the price, I didn't expect much more. Cheap, isolated, and supposedly romantic. That's what we wanted. No distractions, no stress. As soon as we arrived, though, something felt off. The air was thick, like the house itself was holding its breath. There were no sounds of wildlife, no birds, no rustling of leaves. It was just quiet. Too quiet. Sophia seemed to sense it immediately. This place feels wrong, she said, her voice barely above a whisper as she shivered next to me, despite the warmth of the afternoon sun. I laughed it off, trying to lighten the mood. It's just a little old, Soph, that's all. It's got character. But even as I said the words, I couldn't shake the unease settling into the pit of my stomach. There was something about the way the trees seemed to press in around the cabin, the way the water in the lake never rippled even when the wind picked up. It wasn't normal. Still, I didn't want to ruin the weekend, so I shoved my concerns aside and told myself we'd be fine. I was here with Sophia, and that's all that mattered. We'd spend the weekend fishing, hiking, enjoying each other's company. Simple, quiet, perfect. We unpacked in silence, Sophia glancing around like she was searching for something, or maybe trying to find something to justify the feeling of dread gnawing at her. I didn't blame her. There was an undeniable tension in the air, as though the house itself was watching us, waiting. The guest room, where we'd planned to sleep, was tucked away at the end of a narrow hallway. The bed was covered in an old quilt, faded but clean. Yet something about the doorway, the way it loomed in the dim light, unsettled me. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it felt wrong. I didn't say anything, though. I wasn't about to make Sophia more nervous. Besides, I couldn't ignore the fact that the cabin was beautiful in its own way, with its creaky wooden floors and rustic charm. It felt like stepping back in time, like we'd stumbled upon something untouched by the world. That night, after a dinner of canned soup and store-bought bread, we settled in front of the fireplace. The wood crackled, casting long shadows against the walls. We talked, laughed even. I tried to keep the conversation light, and for a while I forgot about the heavy air, the silence outside. Then, after we'd turned off the lights and crawled into bed, I heard it. At first it was so faint I thought it was my imagination. A whisper. Not from the other side of the room, but like it was coming from just beyond the wall. A voice, muffled, like someone murmuring in a language I didn't understand. I lay there for a moment, waiting for it to stop. Maybe it was the house settling, the wind pushing against the wood. But the whisper didn't stop. It grew more distinct, more insistent until it felt like it was coming from inside the walls themselves. Sophia shifted beside me, her body rigid with tension. "Do you hear that?" she asked, her voice barely a breath. I nodded slowly. "Yeah, it's nothing. Probably just the pipes or something." But even as I said it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that we weren't alone in this house. Not anymore. I stared at the ceiling, trying to ignore the whispers, trying to convince myself that it was just the wind, the house settling, whatever. But then I saw it. A dark shape, barely visible in the doorway of the guest room. At first I thought it was just a trick of the light, but when I blinked it was still there. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, watching. My heart stopped. I opened my mouth to say something, to get Sophia's attention, but no words came out. It felt like my throat had closed up. My pulse hammered in my ears as I stared at the shape in the doorway, trying to make sense of it, trying to convince myself that it wasn't real. But then the whispering came again, this time louder, clearer, and the shape in the doorway. It moved. I blinked, and it was gone. Just like that. I turned to Sophia, my voice coming back in a rush. Did you see that?" Sophia was sitting up in bed, her eyes wide with fear. "What was that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Didn't have an answer. The whispering stopped, but the unease didn't. And that's when I knew something was in this house with us. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could still feel it, that thing, whatever it was, watching us, lingering in the doorway. It wasn't just the physical silence that enveloped the room. It was the kind of silence that presses on your chest, fills your ears, and makes your heartbeat feel like it's the only thing left in the world. I glanced at the clock on the nightstand. It was just past midnight. The shadows in the room were deep, heavy, and stretched too far, almost as though the dark corners were crowding in on us. Sophia was still staring wide-eyed at the door, her breathing shallow, almost panicked. I don't know," I muttered, the words barely coming out. I ran my hands through my hair, trying to process what I had seen, but the more I thought about it, the more it seemed like a dream. A trick of the light, maybe. Some weird shadow cast by the low, flickering light of the fireplace, but no, I knew what I saw, and what's worse, I knew Sophia saw it too. I'm not going crazy, right?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, as if saying it out loud might make it real. "You saw it too?" I nodded, even though I wasn't sure if I believed my own words. "Yeah, I saw something, but it was probably just a shadow, Soph, maybe a reflection or—" "Stop," she cut me off, her hand trembling as she clutched the sheets tightly. "It wasn't just a shadow. I know what I saw. I don't know what it was, but I know it was looking at us." The air in the room felt cold now, colder than it had been earlier. Even under the covers, I couldn't shake the chill. It was like a cold that came from within, something that crawled into your bones. I sat up in bed, running my hands over my face. "Okay, all right. Let's just try to sleep, yeah? It's late. We're tired. Things always seem worse at night." But Sophia didn't move. She didn't lie back down. She just stared at the door, her eyes fixed, wide, unblinking. I felt the weight of the night pressing on me. I wanted to tell her it was fine, that everything was okay. But I couldn't. I couldn't lie to her. And I couldn't lie to myself, either. The whole cabin felt different now. Like it wasn't just a house anymore. It was a place where something lived. Something that didn't want us there. I don't know how to explain it. Maybe it's something you only understand once you've felt it. That strange, suffocating presence that isn't quite fear, but something colder, something worse. I don't know how long we sat there in silence, the low light from the fireplace flickering in and out, casting long, wavering shadows on the walls. But eventually I couldn't stand it anymore. I had to do something. "I'll check the house," I said. My voice was shaky, but I didn't care. "I'll make sure the windows are locked, just to be sure." Sophia didn't say anything. just nodded. Her eyes were fixed on the door again, but this time she didn't seem to be seeing it. She seemed far away, like the words I was saying didn't reach her. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and shone the flashlight down the hallway. The beams of light cut through the darkness in uneven arcs as I stepped cautiously toward the door. The hallway felt like it went on forever. The floorboards creaked under my weight, the sounds of my footsteps so loud they almost drowned out everything else, but there was still that feeling something was out there, watching, waiting. I checked the windows, locked. I checked the back door, locked. Everything seemed normal, but it wasn't. It wasn't normal. Nothing about this was normal. As I turned back toward the bedroom, I thought I saw something in the reflection of the window. A figure. Tall, thin, shadowed. The way it stood, unmoving, felt like it had been there all along, like it had been, waiting for me to turn around. My heart slammed against my ribs. My throat tightened, but when I spun around, there was nothing. Just the reflection of the empty hallway, just the darkness. I walked back into the bedroom, trying to calm myself. I glanced at the clock again, 1:15 a.m. Sophia was sitting up now, clutching her knees to her chest. Her face was pale, her lips pressed tight together. She didn't look at me, she just stared at the door. "You didn't see it, did you?" She asked, her voice barely audible. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because I knew she wasn't talking about the shadow anymore. She wasn't talking about something outside the door. She was talking about what had come in with us. What had followed us into the cabin. It wasn't gone. That night we didn't sleep. We didn't say much after that. We both lay there wide awake, listening to the silence, waiting for something to happen. It didn't. Not right away, but I could feel it, creeping. The air was thick again. The feeling of being watched, not from outside, but from within. From the walls, the shadows, the very floorboards beneath us. Then, just as I was starting to drift off, a sound broke the quiet. A creak. A shift. From the guest room. The door. It was opening. I froze, unable to move. My eyes locked on the door, willing it to stay still. But it didn't. It opened slowly, inch by inch, until the hallway light bled into the dark room. Sophia's grip on my arm tightened, her nails digging into my skin. Her breath was shallow. "It's back," she whispered, her voice trembling. And I knew we weren't alone. Not anymore. The bedroom door creaked open so slowly, so deliberately, that it felt like time itself had slowed down. My pulse thundered in my ears as the hallway light sliced through the dark, casting long, unnatural shadows across the room. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. It was as though my body had gone numb, frozen in place. Sophia's grip tightened, on my arm, her nails digging into my skin with such force that it hurt, but I couldn't even feel the pain. All I could focus on was the door, wide open now, the dark figure standing just beyond it. It wasn't a shadow, I realized. It wasn't just a trick of the light or my eyes playing games. This thing was real. At first, it looked like a man. Tall, thin. But as I stared at it, my mind started to put the pieces together. It wasn't alive, not in any sense of the word. The figure was still, unmoving, and its presence was so cold that the air around it seemed to freeze. I felt the temperature in the room drop several degrees, the chill creeping into my bones. The first thing I noticed was the suit, a dark, old-fashioned suit, like something out of a 1920s funeral. It was tattered, worn, the fabric faded in places, as if it had been through decades of wear. But the worst part was its face, or more accurately, its lack of a face. It was hidden in shadow, as though a thick veil of darkness clung to it, keeping its features hidden. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to acknowledge it, but my eyes were drawn to it. I couldn't tear my gaze away. Sophia's whisper broke through the silence, low and frantic. "Ryan, don't look at it. Please don't look at it." But it was too late. I was already staring into the abyss. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It just stood there, watching. I could feel its eyes even though I couldn't see them. Cold, empty, but aware. Like it knew everything about me, about us. Like it had been waiting for this moment. I tried to speak, to ask Sophia what to do, to ask her if she knew what this thing was. But the words stuck in my throat. My mouth was dry, my voice gone. The only sound in the room was the faint rhythmic tapping of my heart against my ribs. And then it moved. Not much. Just a slight shift. The figure's head tilted, slightly as if considering us. The suit swayed as if it had weight, but its movements were stiff, jerky, unnatural. The whole thing was wrong. Everything about it screamed wrong. It didn't belong in this world. Sophia's hand gripped mine so hard I could feel her pulse, racing in my palm. "Ryan, we have to do something." I wanted to say something, to comfort her, to tell her it would be okay. But how could I? What could I say when we were facing something so alien? Something that wasn't a person. Something that wasn't human. My thoughts were spinning, but they didn't make any sense. Sophia's voice cracked as she whispered, "My abuela said, if you see something like this, you have to pray out loud. You have to speak to it. Let it know you're not afraid." I wanted to laugh, to tell her how absurd that sounded, but I couldn't. The terror in her voice was enough to convince me that she wasn't saying it just out of desperation. She was begging me to do something. Anything. I opened my mouth to speak, but my throat was so tight it felt like I was choking. No words came out. Sophia's eyes were wide with fear as she turned to me. "Ryan, please pray. Out loud." I didn't know what else to do. I wasn't religious. I didn't believe in things like this. But right then, in that moment, I needed to do something. I needed to try. So I did what she asked. My voice came out hoarse, barely a whisper, but I forced the words out. "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." The figure didn't move, didn't flinch, but something in the room shifted. A flicker, like a light about to go out. I kept praying, the words coming faster now, almost a chant. I didn't know if it was helping, but I kept going. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a fierce, desperate rhythm as I poured out whatever words I could remember. Please let it be enough. And then, I heard it. A low sound. Wet. Rasping. The thing in the doorway shifted again. Its head jerked, upward, and for the first time I saw something. A smile. It was wrong. Not a smile like a human smile, but something twisted, rotting. Its lips pulled back from yellowing teeth, the skin on its face peeling, exposing jagged bone beneath. Its grin stretched wider, and for a moment it seemed to enjoy the prayer. It was feeding off the fear, growing stronger with every word I spoke. Sophia's grip on me tightened. "Don't stop," she gasped. "Keep going." I didn't want to stop, I couldn't. But something was happening, something terrible. The temperature in the room dropped even further. I could see my breath now, misting in the cold air. And then, crack. The light bulb above us shattered, the glass scattering across the floor with a violent shattering sound. The room plunged into darkness. I froze. And then, from the darkness, came the worst sound I'd ever heard. It wasn't a scream, it wasn't a laugh, it was a groan, wet and choking, as if the thing in the doorway was suffocating. And then suddenly the room was filled with the sound of footsteps. Slow, methodical, close. I couldn't move, I couldn't speak, I couldn't breathe. Then a voice, soft, so close it was in my ear. "I'm here." And that was when the screaming started. I don't know who screamed first, Sophia or me. I don't know what happened after that. I just know that we ran. We ran and didn't look back. We didn't stop until we were outside, in the freezing cold, gasping for air. We Never went back inside that cabin. We never spoke about it again, but every night when I close my eyes, I see it. The thing in the doorway, the suit, the smile, and I can still hear the voice. I'm here. The cold air outside hit me like a slap to the face. The shock of it brought me back to my senses for just a second. I felt the rough ground beneath my feet, the hard gravel crunching with every step. But I didn't stop running. Neither did Sophia. We just kept going, away from the cabin, away from it. I didn't know where we were going. I didn't care. My only focus was putting as much distance between us and that thing in the doorway as possible. Sophia was gasping for breath beside me, her face pale, her wide eyes glinting with terror. I could barely see her in the darkness, but I could feel her fear, just as palpable as my own. Neither of us said a word. Words weren't enough to describe what had just happened. We didn't need words. We just needed to escape. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see the figure looming in the shadows behind us. But nothing followed us. The silence of the night had returned. No footsteps, no low, rasping breath. Nothing. But I knew it was still there somewhere, watching, waiting. We finally stopped when we reached the edge of the property, gasping for air, our legs burning from the sprint. The trees surrounding the cabin loomed like black sentinels, casting long, twisted shadows in the faint light of the moon. It felt like we had run for miles, though in reality, we hadn't gone far. Still, the sense of being far away from the cabin gave me some semblance of safety, even if it was just a lie. I turned to Sophia, but she was already shaking her head, her lips trembling. Ryan, what was that? What was that thing? I didn't have an answer. I didn't even know where to begin. How do you explain something like that? Something so completely wrong? I don't know, I said, my voice hoarse from the run, from the fear. But it was real, Sophia. It was real. She nodded, wiping her face with the sleeve of her jacket. But we just ran. What do we do now? How do we stop it? I looked around, my mind racing. It didn't seem possible. How could we have just escaped? It felt like it was still out there watching us, waiting for the moment when we let our guard down. And then I realized something that made my stomach churn. We didn't stop it, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It's still out there. And I think it wants us to keep running. Sophia stared at me, her face going even paler in the moonlight. What are you talking about? I think it's feeding off our fear, I explained, my mind still trying to piece together what had happened. The more afraid we are, the stronger it gets. That thing, it thrives on our fear. That's why it hasn't come after us yet. It's waiting for us to break, for us to be so scared that we can't fight back. Sophia shook her head. That's insane. It can't be true. We're out here now. It can't hurt us. I didn't believe my own words, but I had to try. I had to convince her that we weren't completely helpless. But in my gut, I knew I was wrong. The thing in the cabin wasn't just some ghost. It wasn't some random spirit looking for revenge. No, it was something much older. Something that had been lying in wait for us. Suddenly, I heard something. The whispering. It was faint at first, just a flutter in the air, but it was growing louder. A breath rasping, wet, like it was right behind me. I spun around, my heart racing, but the trees were empty. There was nothing, but it was there. I could feel it. It was waiting. I grabbed Sophia's arm, pulling her closer. We need to go back to the car. We need to leave. Now. Sophia didn't protest. She just nodded, her face drawn with fear. And together, we started walking, fast, our footsteps hurried and uneven as we made our way back toward the road. But as we walked, the air around us felt wrong. It wasn't just the cold anymore. It was the weight of it. The air pressed in on us, thick and suffocating. Every step felt like we were moving through molasses, like the world itself was holding us back, refusing to let us leave. And then, from somewhere in the woods came a sound, a voice, low, deep. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once. "I'm still here." It sent a jolt of fear straight through me, paralyzing me for a moment. My knees shook and I had to force myself to keep moving. Sophia grabbed my arm tighter, her voice a shaky whisper. "Ryan, I can't go on. It's too much. We have to stop. We can't outrun it." I could feel the panic rising in my chest, suffocating me. "No, we have to. But it didn't matter how fast we ran. It didn't matter how far we went. The presence followed us like an invisible hand on our backs, urging us forward, feeding off our terror. It was as though the more we tried to escape, the more it fed, growing stronger, drawing closer. When we finally reached the car, I slammed my hand down on the door handle, but it didn't open. The lock had jammed. I pulled harder. Nothing. I felt like I was going insane. Sophia let out a small sob, her eyes wide and frantic. "Ryan, please!" I yanked at the door again, desperation flooding my veins, but just as I was about to scream, I felt it. A cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around, my heart in my throat, but there was nothing there. And then, in the distance came the voice again, soft, chilling. "I'm still here." I turned back to the car, still locked, still broken, and that was when the full weight of it hit me. We weren't going anywhere. Not now, not ever. The thing had us. It was never going to let us go. And in the darkness, in the cold silence that followed, I realized this wasn't a nightmare. This was our new reality, and I couldn't escape. The cold in the air wasn't the biting winter chill, it was something far worse. It wasn't just physical. It crawled beneath your skin, a bone-deep cold that made you question your very existence. I tried to focus on the car, pulling and pushing on the handle with every ounce of strength I had left, but nothing worked. The door remained stubbornly locked. Sophia stood behind me, her breath shallow, her face pale in the moonlight. I could hear the tremble in her voice as she spoke. "Ryan, please. We need to leave. We need to get out of here." But the words didn't register. I was too focused on the car, too focused on trying to get out of this nightmare, to break free from whatever had us trapped in this cursed place. The trees loomed like dark sentinels, watching us, their shadows stretching across the ground as if they were reaching for us. The whispers in the air grew louder, more distinct. It was the thing in the cabin. It was speaking, taunting us. "You can't escape," it seemed to say. Sophia's hand gripped my arm, and I turned to look at her. Her face was twisted in fear, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Ryan, it's not the car. We can't escape. It's here. It's everywhere." I shook my head, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. "No, we can't give up. We can't let it win." The whispers turned to laughter, low, guttural, and mocking. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Everything around me was spinning, shifting, as though the world itself had turned against us. The wind had died completely, leaving behind an unnatural stillness that made everything feel suffocating. And then I heard the sound, a slow, deliberate creak. It came from behind us. I froze. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. It was the sound of the cabin door slowly opening. Sophia clung to me, her nails digging into my skin. "It's coming, Ryan. It's coming for us." The sound of the door opening was followed by the softest of footsteps. Not the rapid, frantic steps of a person running. No, these were slow, deliberate. Each step punctuated by the deep rasp of breath, as though whatever it was didn't need to hurry. I knew deep in my gut that it was getting closer. The thing, the presence, was drawing near, and I felt helpless. Helpless to stop it, helpless to protect Sophia. I had no idea what it wanted. I didn't know how to fight it. I didn't even know what it was. I could only feel its presence, pressing against my chest like a vice. The whispering in the air grew louder, more frantic. I'm right here. You can't run, you can't hide, you can never escape. I spun around, my heart racing, but there was nothing. The trees were still, the air was thick, empty. But it was there. It was there. Sophia's voice broke through my haze of panic. Ryan, we need to pray, now. I turned to her, confused. Pray? What good is that going to do? It's not real, Sophia, it's just... She cut me off, her voice shaking but resolute. You don't understand. My abuela told me about these things. Spirits that feed on fear. They can't be fought with force. They can only be driven away by faith, by prayer. I looked at her, searching her face for some sign of hope, for some sign that this was all a bad dream. But there was nothing. The terror in her eyes mirrored my own. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I didn't believe in this stuff. Not really. But right now I was willing to try anything. I dropped to my knees, my hands trembling as I clasped them together. I could barely hear Sophia's voice as she began to chant in a language I didn't understand. Soft, rhythmic, almost soothing, as though her words were drawing a line in the sand. A barrier. A shield. I wanted to believe it would work. I wanted to believe that the thing haunting us could be kept at bay, that the fear would finally dissipate. But the whispers didn't stop. The laughter didn't stop. The presence only grew. The ground beneath me shifted. I heard it, the sound of the cabin door opening fully. I dared to glance over my shoulder. For the briefest of moments, I saw something move in the doorway, a dark, hunched shape. But before I could fully process what it was gone. Sophia's voice cracked as she prayed louder. Don't look at it, Ryan. Don't acknowledge it. But I couldn't help it. I couldn't stop myself from looking. The figure was there, standing just beyond the trees. I could see it now, fully. It wore a suit, its edges ragged and decayed like something forgotten for decades. The face was pale, impossibly so. The eyes were empty sockets, dark and hollow. But the smile was wide, stretching impossibly, across its face as if it was too big, too real, too alive. I didn't scream. I couldn't. The air in my lungs had frozen solid. I felt like I was suffocating, as though the very life was being drained out of me by its gaze. Sophia pulled me back, her words a desperate whisper. Pray, Ryan. Pray with me. I snapped out of it. I joined her, repeating the words, though they felt foreign on my tongue. Please, please, leave us alone, please. But as the words left my mouth, the figure began to move. Not quickly. No, it moved with a slow, deliberate pace. Each step seemed to echo in the silence of the night. Each movement exaggerated and unnatural. It was coming closer, inch by inch. Please, I whispered again, as if begging would do anything to stop it. And then, just as it reached the edge of the trees, just as it took that final step into the open, everything stopped. The figure halted. The air grew still once more. The whispers, the laughter, the breath in the dark, all of it vanished. Sophia's voice faltered. Did it work? I didn't answer her. I couldn't. The darkness was still. The air was still. Everything around us was still, but I knew the truth now. It wasn't over. It was never over, because the thing, the watcher, it wasn't gone. It was just waiting for the next time we let our guard down, the next time we looked. And it was patient. It had all the time in the world. As we stood there, trembling, alone in the dead silence of Blackwater, I realized there was no escaping it. Not now, not ever. We were trapped in the dark. I've always considered myself a practical person, grounded in logic and reason. I'm a psychology major at Blackthorn University, which means I've spent countless hours analyzing human behavior, delving into the mechanics of the mind, and debunking myths and legends. I've never believed in ghosts, spirits, or anything supernatural, no matter how many friends or family members insisted that they'd felt something or seen something strange. Ghost stories were just that. Stories. I dismissed them all as wild imaginations, or more likely, the product of too much stress and not enough sleep. That is, until I stepped foot on the campus of Blackthorn University. The school is perched in the foggy hills of Crimson Falls, Massachusetts, a place where the mist never really seems to clear. It's the kind of setting that makes you want to pull your hoodie tighter around your neck and keep your eyes on the ground as you walk, just to avoid glancing up at the looming Gothic buildings. Blackthorn University is old, built on the ruins of a 19th century asylum, the kind of place that has its own dark history, and as if the stories weren't enough, the school has a reputation for being haunted. Everyone knew about the old asylum patients who supposedly never left, but no one ever talked about it openly. You'd hear it in whispers behind closed doors, and it was usually dismissed as superstition. But when I first arrived at Blackthorn, there was something about it, something I couldn't shake. The campus had a chill in the air that didn't come from the weather. The buildings were majestic, but also strangely oppressive, as if they were watching you. But I'd been raised to believe in science, in rationality, and I refused to give into whatever eerie feeling lingered in the back of my mind. It all started during my first semester. I was attending a late-night lecture in Meriwether Hall. The room was packed with students, the professor droning on about psychological theories and case studies. I remember sitting near the back of the lecture hall, my mind wandering as I tried to take notes. The dim, yellowish lighting gave the room a somewhat ominous feel. The windows were covered with heavy, dark curtains, blocking out the moonlight, and the old wooden desks creaked under the weight of the students as they shifted in their seats. The lecture hall was exactly what you'd expect from an old Gothic-style building, dusty, echoing, and cold, as if the place had been forgotten by time. And then, just as the professor reached the most interesting part of the lecture, the lights flickered, then went out entirely. A few gasps rippled through the room, and the collective murmur of discomfort spread quickly. The projector screen went dark, leaving the room bathed in the pale light of the moon that managed to leak through the cracks of the curtains. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning system, which buzzed on and off like a broken machine. The professor laughed, trying to make light of the situation. "Well, I suppose we'll just have to make do with a little darkness," he said, his voice cheerful, though he seemed a little taken aback. But the moment he finished speaking, a cold draft slithered through the room. It felt unnatural, like it was coming from somewhere that shouldn't be cold at all. The windows were tightly shut, and the air conditioning was supposed to be working fine. It felt as if the very walls of Meriwether Hall were exhaling a breath, a cold, chilling breath that made my skin crawl. I looked around, but everyone else seemed to have relaxed, adjusting to the dim light. It was a strange feeling, like the room had been suddenly emptied of warmth, but I wasn't the only one who noticed something strange. From the corner of my eye, I saw the classroom door creak open, by itself. I turned sharply, my heart skipping a beat. The door swung slightly back and forth, though there was no breeze. The room was utterly still. No one else seemed to notice the movement, but I felt my stomach tighten. Then, just as I was about to turn back toward the front of the room, I heard something faint, a sound that seemed to come from the hallway just outside the door. It was the distinct shuffle of footsteps, slow, dragging, uneven, like someone was walking down the hall with difficulty. My mind told me it was just a trick of the wind, or maybe the sound of someone walking on the other side of the building, but my gut told me otherwise. I blinked, trying to convince myself that it was nothing, but then, a voice, a whisper. "They're watching you." I whipped around, scanning the room. No one was looking at me. No one had spoken. The other students were either talking to each other or looking at their phones. My eyes swept the room, again, and I suddenly realized there was no one sitting in the back row. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, and for the first time, I started to wonder if I might be hearing things. But I couldn't shake the words, "They're watching you." It was too clear, too precise. The professor, still oblivious to what had just happened, continued with his lecture as if nothing were out of the ordinary. But I couldn't focus. My heart was racing, and my mind couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking in the shadows. The power came back on just as quickly as it had gone out, and the lights flickered back to life. But that whisper, the sound of those footsteps, it stayed with me long after the lecture ended. As the class filed out of the room, I lingered behind, my mind reeling with questions. Was it just my imagination? Or was something really happening here at Blackthorn? I walked out of Merriweather Hall and into the cool night air, the fog settling around the campus like a blanket. The path in front of me seemed darker than usual, and I found myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone or something there, but there was nothing. Just the silence, the fog, and the haunting chill that still clung to my skin, and that's when I realized it wasn't just the building. Something in this place was alive. Something was watching, and it knew my name. The night after the incident, in Merriweather Hall, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, the memory of the whisper, the voice that seemed to echo in my bones, came rushing back. They're watching you. The words felt like they were still hanging in the air, suffocating me with their meaning. It was the first time I'd felt truly uneasy since I arrived at Blackthorn University. The next morning, I tried to brush it off. My skeptical side screamed at me that it had to have been a figment of my imagination. The cold draft, maybe it was just a malfunctioning air conditioning system. The door creaking open? Old buildings like Merriweather were bound to have their quirks, right? And the whisper? Well, it had to have been someone else in the room, a student messing with me. That's what I told myself anyway, but the feeling didn't go away. It lingered throughout the day, gnawing at me, settling deep in my chest like a stone. I couldn't focus on my lectures. The words the professors were speaking seemed to float right through me. I couldn't concentrate on my notes or the textbooks in front of me. All I could think about was that whisper, that presence, the thought that something or someone might be watching me. By the time evening rolled around, I had managed to push the anxiety aside enough to meet up with some classmates for the rehearsal of the fall play. We were using the Holloway Theater for the production, a crumbling, decaying building that had its own infamous reputation. The theater was older than most of the campus, and it was rumored to be haunted by the spirit of a former actress who had tragically hanged herself on stage decades ago. Of course, I didn't believe in that kind of thing. I thought it was just another one of the campus legends, something to entertain the freshmen during orientation week. But there was no denying the feeling the theater gave off. The large, empty auditorium, with its broken seats, peeling wallpaper, and faded velvet curtains, felt cold and hollow, almost as if the walls themselves were haunted by the memories of the past. I had volunteered to stay late to finish a paper I was working on for one of my classes. It was a Wednesday night, and most of the cast and crew had already gone home. The only sound was the faint rustle of papers as I sat at the back of the theater, the dim glow of the stage lights flickering in front of me. The theater was silent, save for the occasional creak of the old building settling. I was typing away on my laptop when something caught my eye. A figure. I froze, my fingers hovering above the keys. At first I thought it was one of the actors coming back for something they forgot, but then I realized there was no one in the theater with me. There was a figure standing on stage. At first, it looked like a shadow. It was tall and slender, moving with fluid, unnatural movements. The way it glided across the stage was wrong. No sound, no breath. Just the dark silhouette cutting through the dim light like it was dancing to a tune only it could hear. I rubbed my eyes, convinced I was imagining things, but when I opened them again, the figure was still there, moving slowly, as if it knew I was watching. It seemed almost graceful, but the way it moved, too precise, too unnatural, set my nerves on edge. It didn't belong. It wasn't right. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. "Hello," I called out, my voice cracking in the silence. "Is anyone there?" The figure didn't respond. It didn't stop or even acknowledge my presence. It just kept moving, its dark form twisting and turning in the dim light. Every step it took seemed deliberate, calculated, and yet it moved without sound, as if it was floating rather than walking. I took a step forward, my legs trembling. "This isn't funny," I muttered, trying to steady my breathing. Whoever's playing a prank. But as I took another step, the figure suddenly stopped. It turned slowly, deliberately, until it was facing me directly. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The thing, if it could even be called that, wasn't human. It had no features, no face. Just a silhouette, darker than the shadows it stood in, with movement that defied nature. I couldn't explain it. It wasn't a person. It wasn't an illusion. I stood frozen, my breath caught in my throat. My body was paralyzed with fear. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the figure, even as it tilted its head, almost as if it were examining me. There was no sound, no shift of air, just this presence. And then, without warning, the figure flickered, blinking in and out of existence. It moved, but at the same time, it didn't. 1 second it was standing in the center of the stage, and the next it was gone, the shadows swallowing it whole. I stood there in stunned silence, my mind struggling to catch up with what I had just seen. I wanted to run, to leave the theater, but my legs felt like lead. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I forced myself to turn and sprint toward the back door. I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just needed to get out of there, away from that thing, away from whatever it was that had just crossed my path. I didn't know what I had seen, but I knew one thing for sure. It wasn't part of the play. It wasn't a student messing around. That night, as I walked home through the fog-covered campus, the image of that figure, the shadow dancer, haunted my every step. I couldn't shake the feeling that it had been watching me, and I knew that, whatever it was far from over. The next day, I tried to act like nothing had happened. I forced myself to go to class, to sit through lectures, to focus on the textbook pages in front of me as if my mind wasn't still preoccupied with the shadow I'd seen in the theater. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that flickering, shadowy figure moving across the stage. The way it glided through the space, its unnatural movements, the feeling of its presence. I couldn't shake the image of it turning its head, of it knowing I was watching. It was as if it was waiting for me to make the first move. I had never experienced anything like that before. I'd spent years studying human behavior, trying to understand the mind, and yet nothing in my textbooks could explain what I had seen. There was no logical explanation. The more I thought about it, the more I tried to rationalize it, but the truth was, I couldn't. By the time the sun set, I knew I couldn't avoid the theater forever. I'd have to go back. It wasn't just for the play rehearsals either. It was because the longer I stayed away from it, the worse the anxiety grew inside me. I needed closure. I needed to know what was real and what wasn't. Was I losing my mind? Had I imagined the whole thing? Or had something truly unnatural occurred that night? I decided to go back. It was around 9 p.m. when I found myself standing in front of the Holloway Theater. The campus had grown quiet, the fog clinging to the streets, shrouding everything in an eerie haze. The once grand building loomed before me, its tall windows dark and empty like hollow eyes staring down at me. The old stone steps creaked beneath my boots as I walked up to the door, the familiar weight of dread settling in my chest once more. I pushed the door open. It creaked loudly, a sound that echoed down the empty hallway. The theater was dark, save for the faint light from the hallway spilling in through the open door. The silence felt suffocating, the air heavy and cold, as if the building itself was holding its breath. The smell of dust and mildew lingered, making my skin crawl. I stepped into the lobby, glancing around. The theater was still. Quiet. Too quiet. I couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in on me. I walked down the long corridor, past the backstage entrance, past the props storage room. I didn't know why I was walking toward the stage again. Maybe I just needed to prove to myself that I wasn't going crazy. I was determined to confront whatever had been lurking in that dark corner. But as I entered the main auditorium, something was different. The stage was set for a rehearsal. Props scattered about, chairs lined up on the side, the stage lights dimmed low. But there was something wrong. The air felt thicker. The silence felt heavier. I could still hear the faint echoes of the rehearsal from the day before, the voice of the director calling for a break, the actors laughing between takes. It was as if the echoes were stuck in time, as if the theater itself was trapped in that moment. Then just as I was about to turn around and leave, I heard it, the soft shuffle of footsteps. I froze. It was coming from the stage. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared into the dark expanse of the theater. The lights flickered briefly, the shadows dancing in the corners of the room. I took a step back, my breath coming faster now, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. No, no, no. My mind raced as I slowly backed away, but the footsteps grew louder, closer. A figure moved on the stage, its shape shifting in the dim light. It was the same one I had seen the night before, the same tall, slender silhouette. But this time, it was moving in slow, deliberate steps, almost as though it was aware I was there. My legs felt like jelly, my body frozen in place, unable to move. My breath caught in my throat. I knew it wasn't just the flickering lights. It wasn't just my mind playing tricks on me. This was real. I blinked rapidly, my heart racing, and then the figure stopped. It was standing on the stage, facing me directly. The theater was too quiet now. No sounds, no breath, just the heavy presence of the figure and the weight of the silence pressing down on me. I tried to scream, but my voice caught in my throat. And then it moved, but this time, it wasn't like before. It didn't glide. It jerked, twisted. Its movements were broken and unnatural, like it was trying to mimic human motions, but failing. The figure spun around, its arms stretching too far, its body contorting in ways that were wrong. The sound of the floorboards creaking under its movements was the only thing that broke the silence. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I felt paralyzed by fear. I could feel its eyes on me, though I couldn't see its face. It was aware of me. It knew I was there. I stumbled backward, my hands shaking, my vision blurred. I had to get out. I had to leave. But just as I turned to run, the lights on stage flared to life, blinding me for a second, and then they flickered, casting the room into darkness. When the lights came back on, the figure was gone. I stood in the middle of the theater, panting, trying to steady my breath, but the weight of the moment hung over me like a shadow. I scanned the stage, the dark corners, the empty rows of seats. There was nothing. No one. Just the cold, empty space, like it had all been a figment of my imagination. I didn't know how long I stood there, too afraid to move, too afraid to look back. I knew I had to leave. I had to get away from this place, from the theater, from whatever was haunting Blackthorn. But I didn't move. I just stood there in the dark, frozen, waiting for something to happen. And in the distance I heard it, the faint sound of applause, slow, uneven, like the sound of something clapping too far away to see. And with that, I ran. I ran out of the theater, out of the building, out into the night, the fog curling around me like it had a mind of its own. I didn't stop until I was back in my dorm room, the door locked tightly behind me. But the laughter, the applause, it didn't stop, and I could still hear it in my mind echoing through the silence of the room. I thought I could outrun it. I thought that by leaving the Holloway Theater behind, by running from the darkness and the haunting figures in the shadows, I would leave everything behind. But I was wrong. The moment I stepped into my dorm room that night, the door clicking, shut behind me, I felt it. The heaviness, the coldness, that same sensation of being watched pressed in on me. It was as if the walls themselves had followed me, as if the very air was alive with the presence of something unseen. My hands were still trembling and my heart was still racing, a constant thud in my chest. The images of the shadow dancer, the unnatural movements and the flickering lights, played over and over in my mind like a broken record. I locked the door behind me and stumbled to my bed, pulling the covers over myself like some sort of shield. My mind was spinning. I could still hear that laughter, the applause, faint but unmistakable. The sound kept echoing in my head, the sharp, disjointed claps reverberating like they were coming from inside the room, though I knew I was alone. I closed my eyes, trying to block it all out, but it wouldn't stop. I couldn't get the image of the figure out of my mind, the way it moved, the way it knew I was there, watching. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw its long, shadowy form gliding across the stage. the sound of its jerky, broken movements, the sensation of being watched, of being followed. I tried to convince myself it was all a trick of the mind. It had to be. Maybe I was just overtired, overworked with my studies. Maybe it was the stress of being away from home for the first time. I was studying psychology after all. I should have known better than to let a simple, albeit terrifying, illusion get to me. But as I lay there trying to convince myself of this, the silence in my room felt too thick. It was suffocating. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to grow longer, darker. I kept my eyes closed, trying to breathe through it, trying to calm myself, and then I heard it. A sound. Faint at first, just a shift in the air. But then it grew louder. A creak. The sound of something moving. Something unnatural. Something heavy. I sat up quickly, my heart thumping in my chest. My eyes darted around the room. The shadows were still there, just like they had been when I'd entered. The room was unchanged. But the sound, it was coming from the hallway. The same creak I had heard in the theater. I slowly swung my legs off the bed, my feet hitting the cold floor, and stood up. I wasn't sure why I felt like I had to check, but I couldn't just stay there, paralyzed with fear. I crept toward the door, my hand shaking as I reached for the handle. I held my breath, listening. The creak was louder now, almost like footsteps. Slow, deliberate. I felt the same chill that had settled in my chest earlier return, spreading like ice through my veins. I opened the door, cautiously, and stepped. Out into the hallway. It was empty. The lights in the hallway were dim, casting long shadows against the walls. There was no one there, no figure standing in the corner, no shadow lurking just out of sight. But the sound, it was still there. Oh, faint shuffling noise coming from down the hallway, from the direction of the stairs that led down to the common room. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was just around the corner waiting. I took a deep breath and forced myself to move forward, my feet dragging against the carpet. My pulse was pounding in my ears, and my chest felt tight with every step. And then suddenly I stopped. At the end of the hallway, near the staircase, a shadow moved. I blinked, my breath catching in my throat. It was there, in the corner of my vision. A figure, tall and thin, standing just inside the shadows. It didn't move. It just stood there facing me. I froze. My heart skipped a beat. My blood ran cold. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be real. I stared at the shadow, willing my mind to make sense of it. It was just my imagination, right? I had been through a terrifying experience at the theater, and now my mind was playing tricks on me, replaying the fear from that night. But then I saw it, just for a split second. A flicker of movement. The figure's head tilted, and its arms stretched unnaturally wide. Its outline seemed to shimmer, for a moment as though it were being distorted by some unseen force. It wasn't a person. It was something else. I didn't wait to see more. My body moved before I had a chance to think. I slammed the door shut behind me, locking it with trembling hands. I backed away from the door, my breath ragged in my chest, my whole body shaking. What was going on? Why was this happening to me? I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining this. I had seen it, felt it, the shadow. The figure, the laughter, the applause from the theater, the cold, unnatural presence that had followed me. It was all connected. I wasn't safe. I had never been safe. I looked around my room, and it felt smaller, more suffocating, as if the walls were closing in on me. I could hear the faint creak of the floorboards outside my door, and the sound of soft shuffling steps just beyond it. It was the same sound from the theater, the same figure moving in the shadows. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. The campus was too big, too full of history and darkness for me to escape. It was as if the building itself was alive, watching me, waiting for the next step. And then, in the silence that followed, I heard it again. The whisper. It wasn't clear, but it was unmistakable. It came from outside the door, from the hallway where the figure had been standing. They're still watching. I backed away from the door, my knees weak, my mind racing with fear. I had to get out of there. I had to leave Blackthorn University, leave everything behind. But I couldn't. I was trapped. In that moment, I realized whatever was haunting this place, whatever dark force had taken hold of the campus, was not going to let me go. Not until it had what it wanted. I couldn't sleep that night. I could feel the darkness pressing in on me, seeping through the walls, thickening the air around me. Every sound, the shuffling footsteps outside my door, the faint whispers in the distance, was amplified in my mind. The fear that had been creeping in slowly now felt like a tidal wave, and I could barely hold it back. I hadn't told anyone what was happening. How could I? How could I explain the things I was hearing, the things I was seeing, when I wasn't even sure myself? If I went to anyone at Blackthorn University, friends, professors, even the campus counselor, what would they think? They'd think I was losing my mind. They'd write it off as stress or exhaustion. And part of me thought the same thing. But the other part, the part that had watched the shadow dance across the stage, the part that had heard the eerie applause, the part that had felt the presence in the room, knew that something was deeply, horribly wrong here. By morning, I was physically drained, exhausted from the lack of sleep, but my mind wouldn't quiet. It kept racing, tumbling over every terrifying thought, every eerie detail I had experienced. I tried to focus on class, but all I could think about was getting out of Blackthorn. I couldn't live in constant fear. I had to leave before whatever haunted this place came for me. But the longer I stayed, the harder it became to walk away. The pull of the university, the weight of it, was too strong. It felt like the campus itself had a hold on me, pulling me deeper into its grasp. That afternoon, I went to the library, hoping to lose myself in my research, to escape the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to be suffocating me at every turn. But the moment I stepped inside, the feeling followed me. The familiar chill in the air, the unease I couldn't shake. I walked past the shelves of books, trying to focus on the task at hand, but something caught my eye. The corner of the library where the shelves seemed to stretch on forever felt off. There was a shadow there just beyond my line of sight, shifting in the corner of the room. I stopped dead in my tracks. It was like the shadow was calling to me. It was the same feeling I had experienced in the theater, the sensation of being watched, of being drawn to something I didn't understand. I knew what I had to do. I had to confront this. I had to face whatever was haunting Blackthorn University, or it would never let me go. I walked toward the shadow, my heart pounding in my chest. With every step, the air seemed to grow colder. The whispers, the sounds of footsteps grew louder in my mind. I pushed through the fear, ignoring the tightness in my chest, the fluttering panic that threatened to take over. I reached the end of the row of bookshelves and peered around the corner. And there it was. The figure. It was standing there, still and silent, as if waiting for me. The tall, slender shadow I'd seen before. The same shape, the same unnatural stillness. But this time, it wasn't just a shadow. It was more tangible. I could feel it. I could sense the presence, as though it was standing right in front of me, though I couldn't see its face. The darkness around it seemed to deepen, swirling and pulling at the edges of the light. I took a shaky breath and stepped forward, my legs moving without my permission. I had to see its face. I had to understand what it was, why it had been haunting me. But as I moved closer, the figure didn't move. It didn't speak. It just watched, its presence growing heavier, thicker. The air around me felt like it was suffocating me, pressing down on my chest as if the building itself was trying to swallow me whole. Then, in a moment of terrifying clarity, I understood. This wasn't just a shadow. It wasn't just some trick of the light. This figure was alive. It had been there all along, waiting, drawing me in with its pull. I could feel the weight of its presence deep in my bones, in my soul. And for the first time, I knew it was not just haunting me. It was feeding off my fear. I had spent so long trying to rationalize what was happening, trying to explain it away, but now I understood that there was no rational explanation. Whatever dark force had taken root in Blackthorn University, whatever it had always been there, lingering just out of sight, feeding on the terror of the students who walked its halls. The figure flickered, and I gasped as it seemed to shift before my eyes. It wasn't a shadow anymore. It was something more. Something darker. The edges of its form blurred and stretched, and for the briefest second I thought I saw a face, pale and twisted, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through me. And then it spoke. "It's too late for you," it whispered, its voice like a cold breath against my skin. I froze. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach, leaving me breathless. I wanted to scream, but no sound escaped my lips. The figure took a slow step forward, and I felt the air grow heavier still. It was too late. The words echoed in my mind, repeating over and over again like a drumbeat. It wasn't just the figure, it was Blackthorn itself. The history of the place, the suffering of the asylum patients, the restless spirits that had never left. It had all led to this moment. The figure raised its arm, and the shadows seemed to writhe around it. I closed my eyes, my heart pounding in my chest, praying that I was wrong, that I wasn't losing my mind, but deep down, I knew it was already too late for me. I felt a sudden surge of adrenaline, the need to escape crashing through me. With everything I had left, I turned and ran, not looking back. I could hear the footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing behind me, but I couldn't stop. I couldn't look back. I made it to the front doors of the library, pushing them open with all my strength, and burst out into the night. The fog was thicker now, swirling around me like a living thing. I ran through the mist, my feet slapping against the pavement, my breath ragged. But no matter how far I ran, I could still feel it. Them, watching, waiting. I couldn't escape. It had followed me. It had always been there. And as I ran, I heard the soft sound of applause, distant and hollow, echoing through the fog. After the divorce, I needed space. Space to think, to breathe, and to untangle the mess my life had become. I wasn't sure where I was headed, only that it had to be far, far away from everything familiar. I needed isolation, something raw and untainted where no one knew my name, no one knew my past. So I found it. The old hunting cabin tucked away in the Blackroot Mountains of West Virginia. A small place, creaky and forgotten, with a history that hadn't been touched in decades. The mine, nearest town, was Hollow's End, a spot on the map so faint that it was barely a name. The kind of place people only remembered when they passed through, if they passed through at all. The only real company I had for miles was the wind and the woods, the kind of quiet I hadn't experienced in years. At first, everything was exactly as I'd hoped. The air was crisp with the smell of wet pine and the damp earth underfoot. I could finally hear myself think. The anxiety I'd carried with me for so long had loosened its grip, just enough to let me breathe a little easier. The cabin itself was a strange comfort, rough-hewn logs and a stone fireplace that still held the heat of the day. Despite its age, it stood solid against the encroaching wilderness, a quiet reminder that time and nature have a way of claiming everything. I spent my days exploring the forest. The woods were dense and winding, the trees so thick with moss that they seemed to hum with an ancient energy. The forest felt alive in a way I hadn't expected. And at night I retreated into the cabin's solitude. My evenings were simple. I'd light a fire, crack open a bourbon, and settle into an old chair to read, the rain tapping softly on the windows. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could let go. The noise of the world, the expectations, the pressure, the constant buzz of my phone seemed miles away. There was nothing here but the sound of my own heartbeat and the occasional hoot of an owl. I thought, maybe, just maybe, I could heal here. I wasn't thinking about my ex-wife or the wreckage of my marriage, the failure of it all, the decisions that had brought me to this point. It was easier not to think about those things. Here in the quiet of the mountains, I could forget. But that peacefulness, the kind that seemed to hang in the air like a weightless fog, wasn't meant to last. I should have known. By the end of the week, the quiet was becoming too quiet. My days had started to blur together in a haze of wind and rain, but I didn't mind. The rain felt cleansing, washing away the last remnants of my old life. I took long walks in it, letting the water soak through my jacket and chill my bones, as if to strip me of something I didn't need anymore. But then, on the fifth night, everything changed. It began as a whisper on the wind. I was sitting by the fire, nursing a drink and reading a book I hadn't bothered to finish a few years ago. The rain outside had grown heavier, almost deafening. The fire crackled and popped, the warmth soothing me. The night was so thick with rain that the world outside seemed muffled, distant, as if the storm was closing us off from the rest of the world. But then, I heard it. A sound, faint at first, just barely breaking the silence of the night. Thump. It was a low, deliberate noise, like something heavy was shifting on the roof. At first I thought it was the wind, branches bending under the weight of the rain, or maybe some large animal trying to find shelter. But this was different. It wasn't random. It was rhythmic. Thump, thump, thump. I stood up, unsettled, and moved to the window. Outside, the rain poured down in sheets, blurring everything beyond the glass. The trees swayed under the weight of the downpour, but everything seemed eerily still. No creatures scurrying, no birds calling, just the sound of rain, and that thumping getting louder with each passing moment. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear it. It was coming from the roof, a slow, ponderous weight moving along it, as if testing its steps, like it wasn't sure of its own footing. And the worst part, it wasn't just random noise. It had purpose. Thump, thump, thump. I felt a sudden sharp drop in temperature, as if the warmth from the fire had suddenly been sucked out of the room. A chill crawled up my spine, and I found myself holding my breath. I stared at the rain, waiting for the next sound, and when it came, so sudden and sharp I almost jumped. Thump. It was right above me. I backed away from the window, unsure what to make of it. I couldn't explain it, couldn't rationalize it. Maybe it was just a bad night, an accumulation of too many solitary days, a tired mind beginning to play tricks. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The sound didn't stop. It continued, for what felt like hours, a constant, unyielding thumping above me. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the sound stopped. The air was still, heavy, expectant. I sat back down by the fire, my heart pounding in my chest. The warmth of the flames didn't reach me the same way it had before. I felt cold inside, cold in a way that had nothing to do with the rain. And that's when I saw them. The figures. At the tree line, just beyond the reach of the cabin's light, 3 dark shapes stood, unmoving. I squinted through the window, my hand trembling around my glass. The rain, still pouring heavily, outlined their forms, tall, impossibly tall, their limbs stretched and unnaturally long. They didn't move. They didn't blink. They didn't look away. They simply stared at the cabin. I should have closed the curtains. I should have gone to bed, tried to sleep through the noise. But I couldn't look away. Something inside me told me not to. Something told me to stay there. I didn't know what they were. I didn't know what they wanted. But I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow they had been waiting for me. And then, the wind began to howl louder, as if it too was a part of the storm, swirling around the cabin, pressing in on the walls. Couldn't hear anything anymore. Not the rain, not the thumping, not the wind. All I could hear was the sound of my own heart in my chest, and those 3 figures waiting, watching. I wasn't alone anymore. I couldn't remember how much time had passed since I'd last moved from that spot by the fire. The figures outside, still standing motionless in the storm, became part of the landscape of my fear, more present than anything I'd ever known in my life. The rain battered the cabin's walls, but it wasn't the weather that held my attention. It was them, those impossible shapes, tall, unblinking, silent. I don't know how long I sat there staring out the window, but I eventually became aware that the fire had burned low. The warmth that had been comforting just hours ago now felt like an illusion, something that couldn't fend off the cold creeping in. In the back of my mind, I heard the thumping again. It had stopped earlier, but now it was back. It was louder, this time closer. I was sure of it. But the figures didn't move, didn't acknowledge the sounds. They just kept watching, waiting. It was like they were synchronized, like they had been placed there, watching the cabin for a reason. The feeling that they were waiting for something or someone was suffocating. I couldn't take my eyes off of them. Every instinct told me to run, to bolt for the door and escape. But I couldn't bring myself to move. What was out there? What were those figures? My mind tried to rationalize, tried to make sense of it all. Perhaps it was a trick of the rain, a figment of my isolation, my tired mind just playing games with me. But I couldn't dismiss them that easily. There was something about their stillness, their unnatural presence that felt wrong in a way I couldn't explain. I forced myself to look away, trying to gather my thoughts. The air in the cabin was thick now, the heavy scent of wet wood and damp earth mingling with the sharp tang of the burning logs. My gaze moved to the door and my eyes locked on the doorknob as though it was pulling my focus there. That's when I heard it, the low, guttural sound of something dragging across the porch. It was soft at first, but the longer it went on, the more distinct it became, wet, like something heavy and slow. A dragging step, a slow, deliberate pace. The door rattled once, then again. My heart slammed in my chest, and I could feel the blood rush to my ears, drowning out everything else. I leaned closer to the window, my breath fogging up the glass. I couldn't bring myself to open the door, but I couldn't stop myself from staring at it either. Another drag, another rattle of the door handle. Then, a voice. It wasn't clear, at first. It wasn't human, not really. It was guttural, layered with a crackling noise, as if something ancient was trying to speak through the storm. "Look at me." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. My body locked in place. I couldn't move, couldn't think. My mouth went dry. What could I do? What was out there? Was this a dream? A hallucination? I wanted to scream, to shout, to call out for help, but no sound escaped. My breath came in shallow, shaky gasps. My muscles were frozen. I felt like a fly in a spider's web, and the web was tightening with every passing second. The voice came again, only louder this time. The syllables cracked and echoed through the air, mixing with the sound of the storm and the constant thumping on the roof. It seemed to be coming from right in front of the door now, from the porch, from that place where the shadows were darkest. "Look at me." I could barely comprehend what was happening, but my instincts screamed at me to not look, to turn away, to shut my eyes and block out whatever was trying to break through the storm. But I couldn't move. I thought of the figures outside, the ones at the tree line. My mind raced through every horror story I'd ever heard, every creature that hunted in the dark, every shape that defied the laws of nature. But none of them felt real. None of them felt like this. This wasn't something out of a campfire tale or a book. This was something alive, something real. The door creaked open an inch, the noise of it grinding on its hinges sending a ripple of dread through me. The storm whipped inside, carrying with it a damp, unnatural cold. The darkness outside grew thicker, pressing against the cabin as if it were trying to swallow it whole. And then, the thumping stopped. Dead silence. A few seconds later, I heard a whisper in the darkness. Not a sound, but more like a presence. Something brushing against the walls of my mind. I couldn't place it, but it was there, crawling over my skin. And that's when I saw it. Through the small crack in the door, I saw a shape. A shadow that shifted just beyond the threshold. My breath caught in my throat as my mind raced. It wasn't human. It was a figure. Tall and too thin. dressed in ragged clothing that seemed to hang off its bones like an old, rotting coat. The face was obscured by shadow, but I saw its hands, long, distorted fingers grasping the edge of the doorframe, pulling itself forward. I didn't move. I couldn't. The figure stepped closer, its head tilting at an unnatural angle as though it were studying me, watching me as I stood there paralyzed by fear. Then the voice again, not from outside, not from the porch, but from inside. Inside my head. "Look at me." The force of the command was enough to break the spell. My instincts kicked in, and I pushed away from the door, backing into the cabin's center. I stumbled, gasping for air, every nerve in my body screaming for me to run. But where would I go? The storm still raged outside. The cabin was my only refuge. And even though the figures had moved away from the tree line, I could still feel their presence. The air inside the cabin was thick with something I couldn't name. Something was watching, waiting. The world outside the cabin was no longer just rain and trees. It was a place of hunger. And it was closing in on me. I had no way of knowing how much longer I had before it came inside. Before the storm, before the things that had followed it, claimed me too. And so I waited. Waited for the next thump, the next creak of the door, the next whisper in my mind. Because I knew deep down that it was only a matter of time. The storm wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The following morning, I woke to an oppressive silence. The storm had stopped. The rain was gone, leaving the world still drenched like it had been swallowed by something unseen. The air was thick, heavy with moisture. The trees, now swaying gently, seemed less like sentinels and more like whispering witnesses to something unnatural. I couldn't tell if the storm had lasted just a few hours or days. Time had lost its meaning. My head throbbed with the weight of exhaustion, and the ache in my chest was something I couldn't explain. Was it fear? Or was it the loneliness that had been creeping in ever since I arrived at the cabin? Either way, it was real, gnawing at me from the inside. I forced myself out of bed, my legs shaky beneath me, my body sore from a night of tension that had kept me rigid and unblinking. The chill of the cabin only added to the unease that gnawed at my nerves. I stepped over to the window and looked out. There they were again. The figures, those strange, gaunt shapes, stood at the edge of the woods, where the dark tree line met the clearing. Their stillness was disturbing, as if they weren't even part of the living world. Their limbs stretched unnaturally long, their heads cocked to the side as if listening. They hadn't moved an inch since I'd seen them the night before, and yet I could feel their presence pressing in on me. I turned away from the window and backed up against the wall, my heart racing. My mind screamed at me to leave, to run, but the fear that settled in my stomach was heavier than any logical thought. The figures were outside, but I had no reason to believe they wouldn't come inside. The storm had changed things, warped the very air in the cabin. A small part of me wondered if the storm hadn't been a storm at all, but some sort of curtain, lifting to reveal something hidden, something that had always been there, waiting for the right moment. I had to leave. But where? The only way out was through that door, and I had seen what was waiting for me on the other side. Those things, those figures, were no longer confined to the tree line. They had followed me here, inside my thoughts, and I was starting to wonder if they had always been with me in the background, feeding off something I couldn't see. The cabin felt smaller now, the walls pressing in. I couldn't stay here. I couldn't stay and wait for them to come for me. I made my way to the kitchen, the floorboards creaking beneath my weight. The faint smell of stale food mixed with the musty scent of wet wood. The counter was cluttered with the remnants of a life I had tried to escape. Cans of beans, a bottle of bourbon I'd only half finished the night before. There were no windows in the kitchen, but I felt their eyes on me. I felt them, even though I couldn't see them. I needed to focus. I needed to make a plan. I could leave. I could drive out of here and find my way to the nearest town, wherever that was. I just had to gather the courage to step out of this cabin and face the world beyond. But then the power went out. I hadn't realized the generator had stopped. Working, but now with no lights, the cabin felt darker, heavier. I stumbled around in the dark, finding my flashlight in a drawer, the cold metal handle slick in my trembling hand. My fingers were stiff as I turned it on, the beam of light cutting through the gloom. That's when I heard it. A low groan. It came from the porch again. The same wet, dragging sound I had heard the night before. But this time it was closer. Much closer. Like something had crossed the threshold, stepped onto the porch and was now inside. The creak of the door as it pushed open was unmistakable. I stood frozen, the light from the flashlight trembling in my hand. A shadow moved in the hallway, just outside the kitchen. It was tall, too tall for any human figure, and it passed by the doorway so quickly I barely registered it before it was gone. My heart slammed against my chest, but I couldn't look away. I couldn't breathe. The figure had passed so silently it was like it wasn't even there. Just an outline in the air, a shape that didn't belong. I backed up into the corner of the kitchen, my breath quickening. The flashlight's beam flickered, and I realized it was running out of batteries. That was when the voice came again. Look at me. But this time it wasn't in my head. It wasn't a whisper that I could push away. No, this time it was clear. It was outside, coming from the hallway, from just beyond the kitchen doorway. I froze, my body locked in a terrifying paralysis. My mouth went dry. I had to run. I had to get away, but my legs refused to move. The cabin felt smaller, like the walls were slowly closing in on me. The only thing I could hear was the sound of my own shallow breath, the pounding of my pulse, in my ears. I had no idea what was outside, what had followed me here. But I knew deep down that it wasn't just in my mind. The storm had been a warning. The figures weren't here just to watch. They were here to take. And I had no idea how to stop it. Another creak. This one louder, more deliberate. The floorboards groaned under a heavy weight. I turned my head toward the hallway. The flashlight flickered again, the beam landing on something that made my stomach churn. A figure, its body thin and elongated, its hands gripping the doorframe. It stood there still just beyond the threshold. The air was thick with a presence I couldn't escape. I realized I had made a mistake coming here. I'd thought the isolation would heal me, that the silence would be enough to help me forget. But now, as the darkness pressed in, I understood the truth. I wasn't alone here, and I never had been. Something had been waiting for me in the Blackroot Mountains, something that had followed me into the cabin, and I wasn't sure how much longer I had before it claimed me too. With that thought heavy in my chest, I knew this wasn't just a storm. This was something much worse, something that would never stop, and it would never let me leave. The weight of the silence was unbearable, pressing down on me like a suffocating fog. My pulse thrummed in my ears, each beat like a loud warning, telling me that I was running out of time. The figure, whatever it was, stood just beyond the kitchen doorway, watching me. I could see the faintest outline of it, its thin, spindly frame more like a distortion in the air than anything human. Its presence was suffocating, like a terrible itch that I couldn't scratch, a weight that sat on my chest with every breath. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight. I wanted to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Fear had rooted me to the spot, the cold, wet feeling creeping up my spine like the very air had turned to ice. The figure didn't move, but I could feel it watching me, its gaze like 1,000 invisible fingers crawling across my skin. The voice had spoken again, that low, guttural command. Look at me. But I wouldn't. Not now. Not after everything I had seen and felt. I couldn't let it in any deeper. I held my breath, praying that if I stayed still enough, it would leave me alone. I wished for it to vanish, to melt into the shadows like it had before, but this time I wasn't sure it would. This time it felt different. Wrong. More present. More alive. The air was still, but everything felt off. I couldn't tell if the dampness in the room was from the storm that had passed or from something much more sinister. Every rustle, every creak of the floorboards seemed to reverberate in my bones. The cabin wasn't just a building anymore. It had become a living thing, one that was trapping me inside. I needed to move. I needed to do something. I glanced at the flashlight in my hand. The beam flickered again, casting a sickly yellow light on the figure standing in the hallway. For a brief moment, the shadow of the figure morphed, and for the first time I saw something more than a shape. A face. It was pale, almost ghostly, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare straight into my soul. The skin, stretched too tightly over the skull, looked as though it had been pulled thin, like a rubber mask too small for the face beneath. The mouth, wide, jagged, and cracked, stretched unnaturally into an empty grin. And then, as if sensing my terror, the figure smiled wider, its lips pulling back with a sickening crack. "Look at me." The voice came again, and this time I couldn't ignore it. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to give it the satisfaction of knowing I was afraid. But I couldn't help it. My body betrayed me. My eyes followed the movement in the hallway, drawn against my will, like a moth to a flame. And then, it did something that broke me. It stepped forward. The floor creaked under its weight, the heavy thudding of its footsteps echoing in the silence. I saw it move closer, one slow, deliberate step at a time, the way a predator stalks its prey. The room around me seemed to shrink with every passing moment. The walls were closing in, and all I could hear was the sound of my own breath, shallow, and panicked. I had to act. If I didn't, I would lose my mind. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know where to go. The door was only a few feet away, but with each second that passed, it felt farther. I dropped the flashlight. It hit the floor with a muted thud, and in that instant, the darkness swallowed the room whole. I was plunged into total blackness. Fumbled around in the dark, my hands shaking violently as I reached for the doorknob, trying to force myself to move. But the moment my fingers brushed the metal, I felt a coldness seep into my skin. The door, which had always opened so easily before, wouldn't budge. It was as if someone, was holding it shut from the other side. I pulled again, harder this time, but the door remained immovable. The weight of it was pressing back against me, like the cabin itself was trying to stop me from escaping. And then, I heard it again. The scratching. It was soft at first, just a whisper of movement, but it grew louder, closer, like nails dragging across wood. My heart skipped a beat. I turned toward the sound, my breath ragged, barely able to keep myself steady on my feet. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't the rain, it was something on the other side of the door, something trying to get in. I felt a cold gust of air brush across my face, followed by the unmistakable smell of wet earth and rot. The storm outside had gone, but the air was thick with something else now, something foul, something that belonged to the dark. That was when the door shook, violently, as if something had just slammed against it. The metal knob rattled like it was about to be torn off. I stumbled backward, my mind racing. I couldn't take this anymore. I had to get out. I had to find a way to survive this madness. But there was nowhere to go. The walls were closing in on me, and outside I knew. The figures were waiting. Those twisted, long-limbed things that had been watching me since I arrived. They weren't just outside anymore. They were in the house with me. I could hear their breathing now, wet, shallow. It was all around me from every corner of the cabin. I realized then that they weren't just in the shadows. They were part of the storm. They were feeding off it. Feeding off me. Off my fear. With one last desperate push, I ran toward the back door. The floorboards groaned under my weight, protesting with each step, but I didn't care. I had to make it out. I had to. The door, this time, didn't resist. I threw it open and stepped outside into the heavy, wet night. But before I could take another step, I froze. They were waiting for me. 3 figures. Tall, thin, their limbs bending at impossible angles. Their faces were obscured in shadow, but I could feel their eyes on me. They didn't need to move. They didn't need to say anything. I was already trapped. The storm wasn't over. It had just begun, and there was no escaping it now. I stood at the threshold of the door, the cool night air rushing past me, tasting like copper. The heavy rain hammered the earth around me, and the wind howled through the trees, but it didn't matter, not anymore. The storm had become more than just a downpour. It was a presence, a thing with weight and purpose wrapped in the shadows of the mountains. I was no longer running from the storm. I was running from the things that came with it. I turned back, one last time, to look inside the cabin. The door was wide open, but the interior was completely dark. There was no sign of the figures that had been watching me, or the voices that had taunted me. But I knew they were there. I could feel them. Everywhere. In the distance, I could hear something dragging, scraping across the ground. The same sound I'd heard on the roof, only now it was closer, closer than I had ever imagined. My heart was in my throat, and I knew in that moment that I wasn't just running from the storm or the figures. I was running from myself, from everything I had allowed to fester in my mind and in my soul. The cabin was no longer just a place. It had become a mirror to my brokenness, and I couldn't outrun that, but I couldn't stop either. I had to keep moving. I stumbled forward into the night, barely able to see through the torrential downpour. The forest stretched out before me, like a black ocean of trees, their branches clawing at the sky. Every shadow seemed to pulse with life, the darkness alive with things that didn't belong. The ground was slick, the mud swallowing my boots with each step. My breath was coming in shallow gasps, but I kept going. I couldn't hear the figures anymore, but I felt them. Their presence was suffocating. They weren't just out there in the storm, waiting for me. They were inside me too, in my thoughts, in my nightmares, like parasites feeding on my fear. I couldn't shake them off, and I couldn't outrun them either. Then I heard it, a low, wet, rasping sound, like something trying to breathe through a clogged throat. I turned to my left, and in the flickering light of a distant lightning strike, I saw it. One of them. It was hunched, its limbs twisted like roots, its body long and thin. Its face, if you could call it a face, was stretched too tight, its eyes too wide. Its mouth was wide open, gaping, filled with rows of jagged teeth. But it wasn't just standing there. No, it was crawling toward me, its hands dragging against the mud with an eerie, scraping sound. Its eyes locked on mine, unblinking, its smile widening impossibly as it moved closer. I could feel its gaze burrowing into me, and all at once I couldn't breathe. My chest tightened and my heart seemed to slow down, as if the creature itself was siphoning the life from me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but my body refused. The fear was too much. It had a hold of me. I had let it get too close. It was inside me now, just as much as the storm was. I turned and ran. I ran through the forest, the trees blurring past me in a dizzying whirl. My lungs burned, but I didn't stop. There was no time. I couldn't stop. Not now. And then I heard it again. The voice. That guttural whisper from the darkness. Look at me. I couldn't. I wouldn't. But I could feel its presence behind me. Closer now, its breath a wet, shuddering rasp. I didn't want to turn around. I didn't want to see it, but I knew it was only a matter of time before it caught me. And in that moment, the crushing realization settled in. There was nowhere to run. There was nowhere to hide. The storm was everywhere. The figures were everywhere. They were part of the world now, part of the night, part of the very air I breathed. I reached the edge of the clearing, the trees thinning out into the open expanse where the cabin had once stood. But it wasn't there anymore. The ground was bare, empty. My heart sank as I realized there was nothing left. No shelter, no escape. I stumbled to my knees, my body trembling with exhaustion, my mind consumed with the terror of what had come for me, what had come for all of us. In the distance, I could hear the rustling of the trees again. More of them. More of the things that had followed the storm. I knew they were closing in. I could feel their cold eyes on me, watching, waiting. The rain came harder now, battering my skin, stinging my eyes. And in the midst of it, I heard something, faint, distant, but clear. You can't escape. And then it was quiet. Too quiet. I stood shivering, drenched to the bone, my body numb, but the silence only deepened, a suffocating, oppressive quiet that felt too much like the calm before the storm. I looked up, and that was when I saw them. The figures, the twisted shapes, their long limbs, their hollow eyes. There were 3 of them now standing just beyond the tree line, their faces hidden in shadow. They didn't move. They didn't have to. They were already inside me. The storm had never really ended. It was always there. It was part of the place, part of the land, part of the darkness. I didn't know when they would come for me. I didn't know when I would fade from existence, erased by whatever force had taken root here. But I knew this. I would never be remembered. The storm had claimed me, and soon it would claim everything else. As I stood there, watching the figures draw closer, I felt the last of my will slip away. The rain poured down harder, and the earth swallowed the sound. And then there was nothing, only the storm, and the things that came with it. I grew up in Briar's End, a Rust Belt town where the streets were lined with boarded-up factories and the air always smelled like burnt rubber. People used to talk about how the town had once thrived, but all that remained now were the skeletons of buildings, forgotten relics of a past that never seemed to matter anymore. Briar's End had a way of grinding you down, making you forget the good things. But for me, as a kid, it was home. When I was 12, the most exciting thing in my life was the Blackwater steel mill. It had closed years ago. The thick, rusted gates, locked shut. But for me and my best friend Liam Mercer, it was the perfect playground. We'd explore the old steel beams and broken windows, daring each other to climb higher or jump further. It was our own little world, filled with the echoes of the past and the thrill of danger. One late summer afternoon, when the sun hung low in the sky and the shadows stretched long across the factory yard, Liam dared me to do something different. We'd been talking about the Hargrave Asylum for weeks. Everyone in Briar's End had heard the rumors, the whispers about the terrible things that had happened there, the patients who had never been released, the experiments that no one ever talked about. The place was overgrown with weeds, its walls covered in peeling paint, and it was about as close to the edge of town as you could get without stepping into the forest. That day, Liam and I stood at the gates of the asylum. The rusted metal creaked in the wind, the gate a reminder of what had once been. The place was eerie, silent, and I could feel a coldness in the air that didn't seem natural. "Bet you can't make it inside without chickening out," Liam said, grinning at me. I was never one to back down from a challenge. "You're on," I said, and pushed open the gate. It groaned, loud enough to make me flinch, and I immediately regretted it. But Liam was already past me, headed for the front steps, so I followed. Inside, the air was damp, thick with the scent of mildew and dust. The floors groaned under our weight as we walked, the old wood seeming to protest with every step. The walls were covered with faded paint, and the windows were long gone, leaving jagged open spaces that let in the wind. "Let's split up," Liam said, his voice echoing in the emptiness. I didn't want to split up. It was the kind of stupid idea that always led to trouble. But Liam was already walking down the hallway, his steps lighter than mine. I hesitated, then followed, my breath catching in my throat as I heard something strange. A soft, wet scraping noise, like something moving beneath the floorboards. "Liam," I called. "You hear that?" Liam didn't answer. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease creeping up my spine. I turned the corner to see Liam near the old elevator shaft, peering over the edge as though he was checking to see how far the drop was. "Don't get too close," I yelled, but the words barely left my mouth before there was a loud crash. I didn't even think. I rushed forward, my heart hammering in my chest, but when I reached the shaft, all I could see was Liam's body, twisted and broken at the bottom, his eyes wide open, staring at nothing. A scream rose in my throat, but I couldn't make a sound. I froze, paralyzed by fear, my mind struggling to make sense of what I was seeing. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. I ran. I don't even remember how I got out of the building. just that I ran as fast as I could, my legs moving without thinking, my body acting on pure instinct. My mind was a blur, caught between the image of Liam's body and the sound of my own footsteps pounding against the broken ground. When I got home, I slammed the door behind me and locked it, but it didn't feel like enough. My mind wouldn't let go of the image of Liam's eyes, his lifeless eyes. The next morning, I woke up with a pounding headache, the memory of the night before feeling like a nightmare. But when I walked into school, there he was, Liam, standing in the hallway, grinning at me like nothing had happened. His face was the same as it had been before. No blood, no bruises, no sign of the fall. "Hey, man," Liam said, casually slinging his backpack over his shoulder. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I froze, my heart slamming. In my chest, a ghost? No, this wasn't possible. I stared at him, unable to speak. My mind was still reeling from what had happened the night before, but there he was, alive, smiling like nothing had happened, like he had never fallen into that elevator shaft. "You look kinda pale, man," Liam said, laughing. "What's up?" I wanted to scream, to tell him everything, to ask him how he was standing here, how he could be alive, but the words wouldn't come. It was like everything I knew, everything I'd believed in, was unraveling before me, and all I could do was stand there dumbfounded, watching him smile. I had seen him die. I had watched him fall, his body crumpled at the bottom of that shaft. But here he was, perfectly fine. And then, just as easily as the thought came, another one followed. If Liam was alive, what was I missing? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, deeply wrong, that my world, the reality I thought I knew, was slipping through my fingers, and I had no idea what was coming next. The moment I saw Liam standing there in the hallway like nothing had happened, the world around me seemed to warp. I had to blink several times, forcing myself to focus on him, to convince myself that what I was seeing was real. I thought maybe I was still in shock. Maybe my mind had created some illusion to block out what I had seen the night before. The blood, the twisted limbs, the dead eyes. But no, it was Liam. He was right there, standing in front of me like nothing had changed. He caught my gaze, raised an eyebrow, and gave me that familiar, mischievous grin that he always wore. "Hey, man, what's going on with you?" he asked, as if it were just another typical morning. I opened my mouth, but no words came out. My throat was dry, and I could barely breathe. I wasn't sure if I was hallucinating or if something truly bizarre was happening. I had to remind myself that I had seen Liam fall. I had seen him die. But here he was, perfectly alive, his eyes bright, his hair ruffled like any other day. "Liam," I finally managed to say, my voice cracking. How are you?" He looked at me with concern, but there was something different about the way he did it. It wasn't the usual playful concern he'd give me when I was acting like an idiot. There was an edge to it, a subtle question in his eyes, as if he were waiting for me to say something more. "What's wrong with you?" he asked. "You look like you've seen a ghost." It was the same thing he'd said last night, but now it felt like a punch in the stomach. I felt lightheaded, dizzy, and I had to grip the locker beside me to steady myself. I tried to focus, tried to convince myself that this was real, that I wasn't losing my mind. "Liam," I repeated, my voice more firm this time. You were dead. Last night, you fell into the elevator shaft. I saw you fall." I had to say it. I had to hear myself say it, because the more I thought about it, the crazier it sounded. But I couldn't let go of the memory, the blood, the way his body had twisted at the bottom of that dark shaft. Liam didn't respond right away. He just stared at me for a moment like he was trying to understand what I was saying. His eyes flickered with something that looked almost amused. "Man, you're acting weird," Liam said, breaking the silence with that same grin. "You sure? You're okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." It felt like a punch to the gut. I stared at him, my mind racing. His words, his tone. It was like he was mocking me, like he wasn't even acknowledging the reality of what had happened. He wasn't acting like someone who'd fallen into an elevator shaft. He wasn't acting like someone who had died. It was like I was the one who had imagined it all, like I was the one who was out of my mind. I opened my mouth, but I didn't know what to say. I wanted to ask him how he was alive, how he was standing in front of me like nothing had happened, but it all sounded too insane. I wanted to shout, to demand some kind of explanation, but the words got stuck in my throat. "I'm fine," Liam added casually, clapping me on the back as if we were just two friends talking. "You should get some sleep, man. You've been acting off lately. I'm worried about you." I wanted to scream, but all I could do was stand there, frozen, staring at him. He looked so normal, too normal. His face was the same, his clothes the same, his voice the same. It was like nothing had changed. The only thing that had changed was me. I was the one who felt like I was losing touch with reality. I walked away, not saying another word, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to get out of there. I couldn't be near him anymore. He couldn't be real. As I made my way to class, my mind was racing. I tried to focus, to follow the lecture, but everything felt off. The words the professor spoke felt like they were coming from a distance, muffled, as if I were underwater. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that I had crossed some line between reality and something else. I kept telling myself it was just a trick of the mind, a traumatic memory replaying itself. But deep down, I knew something had changed, something fundamental. It wasn't just Liam. It was everything. The world I had always known felt like it was slipping away from me. The cracks in reality, the strange occurrences I had been noticing, they all seemed to be getting worse. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The odd things had started small. My mom, for example, had started setting the dinner table for 4 when it was just the two of us. I'd ask her why she was doing it, and she'd just laugh, saying she must have forgotten. But I knew she hadn't. The way she looked at me, the confusion in her eyes when I asked, it made me uneasy. It was like I was the only one noticing the world changing around me. And then, a few days ago, in my psychology class, I realized something even stranger. The professor had called the roll, and when he got to my name, Ethan Cole, he skipped over it. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe he was distracted, or maybe it was just a coincidence. But then it happened again. The next class, my name was skipped, and then there was the shadow in the hallway. I'd seen it a few times now, just a dark shape that flickered in the corners of my vision. But when I turned to look, there was never anyone there, just shadows, playing tricks on my mind. It was like I was living in a version of the world that was starting to unravel, like the threads were being pulled apart in front of me, and no one else seemed to notice. That's when I found Dennis Velt. Dennis was a grad student in the psychology department. I had come across his name while doing some research into strange psychological phenomena, and I figured I had nothing to lose by reaching out. He responded to my emails quickly, and soon we were chatting over Skype, his face flickering in the grainy video feed. "You see them too, don't you?" Dennis asked, his voice low, almost hesitant. "The hollow ones. They're editing reality. They're making things disappear." His words sent a chill down my spine. It sounded insane, like something out of a horror movie, but I couldn't deny the connection. The things I was seeing, the shifting reality, the cracks, the way Liam had come back from the dead, everything seemed to fit. "They feed on memories," Dennis whispered over the static, his face looking pale and drawn. "They erase people like bad drafts. You're not imagining it, Ethan. The hollow ones, they're real." Dennis had more files, more cases. People who vanished but were never reported missing because the world simply forgot they existed. People who had just disappeared without anyone noticing, without any trace. I needed answers. I needed to know what was happening, what the hollow ones were, and why I was seeing things no one else seemed to notice. And then one day, the Skype call froze. Dennis's face became still, frozen in mid-sentence, his eyes wide in fear. His last words before the connection cut out were, "Ethan, they're in my—" The call ended. Dennis never appeared in his apartment again. His name wasn't on any class rosters. He was gone. And that's when I knew. They were coming for me. The hollow ones were here. It was hard to breathe after Dennis disappeared. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every corner I turned, every step I took, it felt like the world was closing in on me. The weight of what Dennis had said lingered in my mind, like a shadow I couldn't escape. The hollow ones. They were real, and now they were coming for me. I tried to ignore it. I tried to go about my day-to-day life like everything was fine, like I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting to see something or someone watching me. But the cracks were becoming more obvious. They were starting to show in everything. The way people behaved, the way time seemed to stretch and bend, the little things that didn't quite add up, and I couldn't stop myself from noticing. It started with my mom. At first it was subtle, just small things that didn't seem to matter. She'd set the dinner table for 4, even though it was just the 2 of us. I'd ask her why she was doing it, and she'd smile and say, "Oh, I must have forgotten, Ethan." But there was something in her eyes, something empty. It was like she was looking through me, not at me, like she wasn't really there. I asked her about it again one evening, trying to keep the conversation light. "Mom, you set the table for 4 again. You know it's just us, right?" She blinked at me, her smile stiff, and then she laughed almost nervously. "I guess I'm just getting forgetful," she said, her voice a little too bright. But it didn't feel like she was actually present. It felt like she was a ghost, a copy of the person I'd known all my life. The real mom had slipped away somewhere, and I was left with this hollow version of her. Then there was the roll call incident at school. It happened in my psychology class during the first lecture of the semester. I had been sitting in the back row trying to focus when the professor called out names. He was an older man, friendly but forgetful, and I didn't think much of it when he skipped over my name. It wasn't the first time a teacher had overlooked me. But then, during the next class, it happened again. My name was skipped. And again, nobody noticed. It was like I wasn't even there. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe I had been spaced out and missed something. But when it happened a third time, I couldn't deny it anymore. There was something wrong. It wasn't just me. Nobody acknowledged I was even in class. I tried to bring it up with the professor after class. "Hey, I noticed you skipped my name during roll call a few times," I said, my voice hesitant. "Is everything okay?" He gave me a strange look, as though he'd never seen me before. "What do you mean?" he asked. "You're here every day." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Yeah, but you skipped me a couple of times." His expression changed to one of confusion, and he shook his head. "I didn't skip you. Are you feeling all right? Maybe you should see a doctor." I stood there for a moment, trying to process what had just happened. He was acting like he didn't even remember calling roll. Like I didn't exist in his reality. And I couldn't explain it. It was like I was disappearing one moment at a time. I walked out of the classroom, my mind reeling, the weight of it all pressing down on me. The world was starting to shift, and I was being left behind, slipping through the cracks like a forgotten detail. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, and I was starting to believe Dennis. I had to. The hollow ones were here. They were editing reality, erasing people from existence, and I was next. I spent the next few days scouring the internet, desperate for answers. I kept searching for anything related to Dennis's warnings. Plot holes in real life. That was the key phrase he had sent me in one of his messages. I didn't really understand what he meant by it at first, but now it made perfect sense. The world I was living in, my school, my town, my home, wasn't the same anymore. It was broken, and I was stuck in the middle of it, unable to escape. That's when I came across something, a thread buried deep in a forum I'd never heard of. The post was from a user named Anonymous, and the title was simple: "The Hollow Ones." A warning: I clicked on it, my pulse quickening as the words appeared on the screen. The post was vague, written in broken sentences as if the author had been interrupted multiple times. But the more I read, the more familiar it became. The person who wrote it described seeing the same things I had, people acting strange, memories, slipping away, moments lost in time. The post went on to say that once you saw the hollow ones, once you became aware of them, it was only a matter of time before they erased you from reality entirely. They feed on memories, the post read. They erase the past like it never happened. They twist reality, make you think things are normal until everything is wrong. Until you are wrong. It was exactly what Dennis had told me. It was happening. I kept reading, feeling the room close in around me. The more I read, the more I felt my stomach churn. The user had posted something else, an address, along with a note. If you want to know the truth, follow the trail. They're watching. They're always watching. I stared at the address for a long time, my mind racing. Could this be the key? Was this my last chance to stop it? Or was I already too far gone? The next evening, I found myself standing outside, an old abandoned building in the middle of Briar's End. The air was thick with the smell of oil and rust, the same smell that had always lingered in this town. The building in front of me was crumbling, its windows shattered and covered with grime. It looked like it had been forgotten, left to rot along with the rest of the town. I had no idea what I was hoping to find. I only knew that I couldn't sit by and wait for the hollow ones to take me. I couldn't let them erase me like they'd erased Dennis. So, I stepped forward, my hands trembling as I pushed open the door. Inside, it was dark, but I could make out the outlines of old machinery, long abandoned. The faintest trace of light filtered through cracks in the walls, casting eerie shadows across the room. And then I saw something, or someone. A figure. It was Liam. He was standing in the center of the room, smiling at me like everything was fine. But I knew better now. I wasn't seeing my best friend. I was seeing one of them. The hollow ones had finally found me. And now there was no escape. Liam stood in front of me, his smile wide and familiar. But something was wrong. The air around him felt wrong, like the world was distorting. I could feel the heavy weight of it, pressing against my chest, making it hard to breathe. It was like time itself had bent and warped in that moment, as if the reality I knew was no longer stable. I froze, my body refusing to move, my mind caught between the memory of the accident, the fall, the blood, the twisted body, and the version of Liam standing in front of me now, perfectly fine, as if nothing had happened. Liam? I managed to say, my voice trembling. The word felt foreign in my mouth. I wasn't sure if I was speaking to my best friend or to the hollow thing standing in his place. Hey, man, Liam said casually, his voice the same as it had always been. You look like you've seen a ghost. I couldn't make sense of it. My thoughts were racing, trying to piece together the impossible. I had seen him die. I had seen his body crumpled at the bottom of that elevator shaft, his eyes wide open, staring into nothing. I had felt the gut-wrenching terror as I ran out of that building, unable to look back, unable to process what I had just witnessed. And yet here he was standing in front of me like it was any other day. Liam, I said again, this time more forcefully. You fell. You died. Liam's smile faltered just for a moment before he shook his head and laughed. What are you talking about, man? You've been acting weird since last night. You really need to get some sleep. He reached out and clapped me on the back like it was just some dumb joke, some weird misunderstanding. But it wasn't a joke. I knew it wasn't. I took a step back, my heart hammering in my chest. The room felt smaller, tighter, as if the walls were closing in on me. I couldn't breathe. No, I whispered, my voice breaking. This isn't right. You died. I saw you die. Liam's expression shifted. The smile faded completely, and something darker, more distant, crept into his eyes. His gaze was unnerving now, empty. Ethan, he said, his voice flat, almost as though he were speaking to a stranger. You're not making any sense. You've been seeing things, man. I could feel the room start to spin. I blinked, trying to steady myself. But the more I looked at Liam, the more I felt something slipping away. Something important, something real. Then, without warning, Liam's form seemed to flicker. Like a glitch in a video, his image distorted for a split second. His features stretched unnaturally, and his body blurred. I took a step back, my heart skipping a beat. What the hell was happening? I reached for my phone in my pocket, desperate for some kind of anchor, some sign that I wasn't losing my mind. But when I pulled it out and unlocked it, the screen was blank. No apps, no contacts, no photos, just a blank white screen. I checked the time. 2:43 p.m. It hadn't changed since I had last looked, but something was wrong. It felt like time had stopped moving. I flipped through my phone again, searching for something, anything that made sense, but nothing was there. Liam had taken a step closer, his shadow falling over me. You need to stop worrying about this stuff, man, he said, his tone still unsettlingly calm. It's not good for you, just let it go. The flicker happened again. This time I saw it more clearly. Liam's features shifted, the edges of his face warping as though someone was erasing the details. His skin went from its usual warm tone to a dull, ashen gray. I could see the outlines of his face like a photo being blurred. I stumbled back, my mind reeling. What the hell is going on? I whispered, more to myself than to him. Liam didn't respond. Instead, he just watched me, his eyes empty, like he wasn't really there anymore. The shadows seemed to stretch around him, pulling at his form, and for the briefest moment I thought I saw his outline shift again, like he was being erased. Before I could react, the door behind me creaked open. I turned quickly, my heart in my throat. The door to the building had swung wide open on its own, a gust of wind rushing through the space, rattling the old dusty window panes. I was paralyzed by fear, my entire body locked in place. And then, there they were, the hollow ones. They moved, in the periphery. Tall, faceless figures, their bodies seemingly made of shadow and film. Their fingers stretched unnaturally long, curving like strips of old, deteriorating film, their edges curling in on themselves. They didn't make a sound, but their presence was suffocating, like a weight pressing down on my chest. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My vision blurred, and I felt like I was falling, like I was being sucked into the very fabric of the air around me. Liam, the thing that was pretending to be Liam, didn't move. He didn't react. It was as though he wasn't even aware of the hollow ones. He just stood there, his smile returning like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The figures closed in around me, their movements jerky, distorted, like they were bending reality itself. The air felt thick with something heavy, something ancient and cold. I could feel their presence on my skin, like they were reaching into me, pulling at the edges of my thoughts. I knew in that moment that I was already being erased. The hollow ones were rewriting reality, and I was slipping through their cracks. I wasn't supposed to be here anymore. I wasn't supposed to exist, and then it happened. The room around me began to fade. The edges of everything, the walls, the floor, even Liam's fading figure, dissolved like a dream slipping away. My body went numb, my vision narrowing until all I could see was the shadow, the film-like distortion of the hollow ones. Liam's voice echoed, distorted and cold. "Don't worry, Ethan," he said. His voice was flat, robotic. "You were never really here." The last thing I saw before the void took me was Liam's grin. It was wide, unnaturally wide, and then nothing. I was gone, erased, forgotten, and the hollow ones moved on as they always did. The world continued to twist and bend, rewriting itself, erasing me as if I had never been there at all. When I woke up, it was like I had been thrown into a different version of my life, one where everything felt familiar and unfamiliar at the same time. The air was thick, colder than usual. The sharpness of reality I once knew had softened, like a fog rolling in over my mind, making it difficult to focus. I sat up, my heart still racing in my chest. For a moment, everything seemed normal. The quiet hum of the room, the faint light coming through the blinds, the familiar feeling of my bed beneath me. I rubbed my eyes and glanced around, trying to make sense of where I was, what had happened. But then something felt wrong, deeply wrong. The room, my room, felt off. The walls seemed slightly askew, as though they were pressing in on me. I could see the slight flicker of the light in the corner, as if the bulb was struggling to stay on. The room felt hollow, like something was missing, something I couldn't put my finger on. I pushed myself off the bed, my body still heavy with a strange sense of disconnection, like I wasn't really here. I looked in the mirror, trying to steady myself, to figure out what was happening to me. I blinked, and then I stared. It wasn't me. The reflection in the mirror wasn't right. My face was familiar. Yes, it was my face, but off. It was like looking at a faded version of myself, an image that had been corrupted, worn down over time. My features were softened, and my eyes seemed distant, like they were looking at something far away, something I couldn't see. Panic crept up my spine, curling around my neck, choking me. I took a step back, but my reflection didn't move. I reached out to touch the glass, my fingers trembling. And that's when it hit me. The name. My name wasn't there. I couldn't see my name. The word Ethan had disappeared from the reflection entirely. I pressed my palm to the mirror, my breathing shallow, the coldness of the glass seeping into my skin. There was nothing in its place, just blankness, like my existence had been erased. I stumbled back from the mirror, my chest tightening. I couldn't breathe. I turned and rushed out of my room, almost tripping over my own feet. The hallway stretched out before me, but something was different. The edges of the walls were darker, blurred, like they were being erased from the inside out. I walked quickly, but the hallway felt longer than usual, like I was walking in slow motion, or like I was moving through a dream that I couldn't escape. I made my way downstairs, my mind in a blur of confusion and dread. I needed to find something real, something that could prove I wasn't just a figment of some twisted dream. But the more I looked, the more it became clear. Nothing was real anymore. The living room was empty. The furniture was still in place, but it looked wrong, distant, faded, like a poor reproduction of the real thing. And my mom, where was she? "Mom," I called, my voice shaky, barely louder than a whisper. "Mom?" There was no response. I walked to the kitchen, but it was the same. Empty. The refrigerator door was slightly ajar, the light flickering faintly inside. The fridge was full, but there was nothing familiar about the contents. The labels on the food were wrong. The dates didn't match, and the items themselves seemed off. Things that shouldn't be in my house, things that didn't belong. A chill ran through me. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt the same suffocating fear I had felt when the hollow ones closed in on me. They had been here. They had erased me. I turned to leave the kitchen, my mind spinning with everything that had happened. But as I walked past the hallway, something caught my eye. In the living room, in the corner of the room where the shadows met the walls, I saw a figure. Liam. He was standing there, as still as ever, smiling that same unnerving grin. But this time, it wasn't the same grin. This time, it was like he knew something I didn't. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The air grew heavier, suffocating, like it was pressing me into the floor. "Liam?" I managed to say, though my voice was barely audible. He didn't move. His eyes locked onto mine, empty and distant, and for a second I thought I saw the faintest flicker of something in them, something dark and knowing. "You should have known, Ethan," Liam said, his voice soft but cold, like he was speaking from a great distance. "You were never really here." I stumbled backward, my heart racing. I wanted to run to escape, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like they were made of stone. I looked around the room, and that's when I saw it. The faintest shimmer in the air, like the edges of the world were dissolving. The walls, the floor, the ceiling, everything was starting to fade, the lines blurring and shifting like they were being erased from the inside out. "No," I whispered, my voice breaking. "No. Please." But Liam didn't respond. He just stood there, watching me with that empty expression, his smile widening slightly as the darkness in the room deepened. The shadows twisted around him, stretching like they were alive, pulling at the fabric of the space itself. And then, it happened. The world around me crumbled. The walls, the floor, the air, they all disappeared into the void. I reached out, trying to grasp something, anything, but there was nothing left. Just emptiness. I felt my body begin to dissolve like I was being pulled into nothingness. My thoughts scattered, the memories of who I was slipping away like sand through my fingers. There was no more sound, no more light, just the oppressive, suffocating silence of the void. And then, as everything dissolved, I heard one final whisper, the same voice I had heard so many times before. "You were never really here, Ethan." And then, nothing.